This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Why are we upset if we're creating jobs?
Inflation is still a thing out there for the everyday consumer.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
The economic calendar jam-packed today.
And Michael Barr with news.
Tensions between the U.S. and China have heated up even more.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo. Mateo on assignment, Sunset Boulevard. Life is tough. She's squeezing 2-day vacation into a 4-day episode. She'll be back on Monday. Rumor has it. John Tucker in for Lisa Mateo today. We'll do lots with John Tucker today on a day of bank earnings. Damian, let's start the show, get it going, and get to Alison Williams about JPMorgan. Can they afford the building on Park Avenue? The building is gorgeous.
You know, it's about that bathroom at JPMorgan. You know, I heard they did some renovations there. But Alison, I mean, we really need to know what's going on here. I think Wells is off something on the order of 6% in pre-market trading here.
There's Wells Fargo down 6%. JPMorgan churning with a 23% return on equity, I believe it is. We'll get to that in a moment. And I do want to talk to Damian Sassower, folks, about the undercurrent out there in his world. It's off our radar as we focus on Washington. All sorts of good people to be with us today after that historic moment last night with the president at the NATO meetings. Anne-Marie Horton in conversation with the leader of NATO, Mr. Stoltenberg of Norway. And we're efforting Josh Wingrove, who had a piercing question at the end of that press conference. So let's get it started because we need to get to Alison Williams. Damian's shaking. He wants to talk to Alison Williams so much. From the Interactive Broker Studios, our Bloomberg Business Flash, John Tucker.
All right, we'll start with Wells Fargo after their earnings report. Shares right now in the pre-market down close to 6%, 5.6% right now. Futures indicate a mixed open. The Dow futures right now 30 points higher. S&P E-mini futures 2 points higher. The NASDAQ futures after yesterday's tech-led sell-off right now down 11 points. And the Russell 2000, that ended the session yesterday up over 2%. So rotation, keep that in mind. Looking at shares of AT&T this morning as well, they're down 2.3%. AT&T, this comes in a regulatory filing this morning. They say they suffered a massive hack of customer data. This is actually separate from the one that we heard about earlier this year. So this includes records of calls and texts for nearly all its mobile phone users for a 6-month period in 2022. Massive, again, because it includes all of their mobile phone customers. As we look at treasuries this morning, the 2-year yield 4.52%. The 10-year yield right now, that looks unchanged, 4.21. Of course, we get the other inflation print this morning at 8:30 Wall Street time with the producer price index. So we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker. That's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Damian and Tom.
John Tucker, thank you so much. What we're going to do is dive into earnings. On a Friday, we've got 3 earnings coming out. Citigroup later, which in itself will be fascinating. It was a reverse 10-for-1 stock split 15 years ago, and they're still trying to figure out to move forward. Wells Fargo with a very different platform, always challenged. Damian's chomping at the bit to ask Alison Williams about that. But I'm going to start with Fortress Diamond. It just keeps continuing, Alison. You have lived this. Harrison was running JPMorgan, and this young Turk, Jamie Dimon at Bank One in the Midwest, was going to come in and save the day. Save the day. He's built a juggernaut. Let's start with the JPMorgan distinction. Why are they different this Friday morning?
I think they just continue to reap the benefit of their investments. I think that one of the things that JPMorgan has done is, being willing to spend the money. Keep in mind a couple of years ago, they said, look, we need to invest. We're investing in technology. People were very upset about the operating costs, but they're proving they're proving that those investments are yielding results.
Right. They're trading at a 12-13 multiple. They're up 16% per year for the last 10 years. Nobody's even close. And I got a headline JPMorgan notches profit on Visa gain. Is that the Sassower house north of New York City? Killing it for Jamie.
This is how they're paying for all the great things that Damian was just referencing. So they had an $8 billion gain related to tendering some Visa shares. They announced this actually even prior to their investor day. So I think for the most part, investors saw this coming, but sometimes you don't know who's watching the stock, and if they're seeing this extra $1 billion in expenses related to that gain, and if there could be some negative reaction to that. But we think it's smart. So they have this big $8 billion gain. They're going to pull forward some of their charitable contributions by funding those contributions with shares. So we know that that's a great tax advantage. But that is upping their costs for the year by $1 billion. So we think that that's a smart move. I think on the more negative side, Wells Fargo guiding up on their costs, which investors are not going to be happy about. These operating losses, or non-operating losses as they refer to them, the customer remediation costs that relate to the ongoing issues, the asset cap that have been going on since about 2016.
Right. I mean, look, Amy. Net interest margin, OPEX, credit quality, who cares? All we care about are banking revenues and trading results. Talk to us about FIC trading, equity trading. I mean, it's been a pretty good quarter, no? I mean, what's going on at JPMorgan? My man, Matty Kolakowski, we're in securitized sales over there, said he had a big quarter. Is he getting paid?
Well, it is a good quarter. I mean, I think there's one of the things that investors are really keying on is the investment banking revenue, and perhaps that's just because it relates to all of our businesses, because the revenue itself, just investment banking, isn't a huge lever for JPMorgan, but it does help trading, which is a bigger lever. And we saw better than expected results, $2.5 billion on the investment banking revenue side, and that helped FIC trading better than expected, equities trading better than expected. Really, we're seeing the lift from those strong equity markets as well as credit trading on the FIC side.
Alison, I'm just kidding, right? I mean, it does matter, but it matters more for Wells Fargo when we're looking at OPEX and we're looking at fundamentals. So talk to us a little bit about why that's different there. I mean, this is something that's been going on since 2016, no?
It's been forever.
It's been forever. I mean, when we think back and they first announced these issues, and for those not familiar, there was a fake account scandal. We've seen a complete turnover of management. We've seen a couple of CEOs, the board's turnover, just years and years of trying to get it right. This has never happened to a bank. This sort of the regulatory backlash, and so no one knows when it's going to end. It just keeps getting longer and longer, and we just keep seeing these costs. And so we should be getting to the tail end of those. But the fact that there's two things. So the costs are going to be more than expected. The net interest income, they've been guiding down 7 to 9%, and now they're saying that it's going to be on the higher end of that range. Some of the banks that have more trading and have talked about, like, there's an impact there, kind of goes out in the wash with fees. But we're going to want to hear more detail from Wells. Why are they a little bit more negative?
What you do? You brought notes into that?
Damian,
it's a Friday.
Come on.
We do Bloomberg Surveillance.
Bank earnings with Alison Williams? Come on. I'm prepared. But Alison, look, I mean, for me, I'm a fixed income guy, and, for me, it's about credit quality. And, I'm curious, what are your takeaways here? I mean, are they provisioning more? I mean, we're at the tail. I mean, one would think we're in the 11th inning of this cycle here in the U.S. I mean, does anything stand out to you in terms of credit quality on that end of the equation?
So far, I mean, we haven't dug fully into it, but it looks like what we had expected, which is we're seeing provisions for the credit card business. And a lot of that just relates to growth. Charge-offs look like they were in, those are kind of today's costs. They're as expected. But as those portfolios grow, you have to reserve for the life of the loan, and cards have the highest loss rate of all the categories, as you know.
I want to go bigger, broader here. Both of you got a lot of experience on this, and of course the carnage of the great financial crisis, and that day where Jamie Dimon bought the Bear Stearns building for $10 or $1 or whatever it was.
City paid him.
Alison Williams, JPMorgan has global aspirations. Are the government's Alison Williams going to let JPMorgan expand and be America's bank abroad?
I think the key thing from a regulatory standpoint really relates to the capital standards, and this is something that all the U.S. banks have been complaining a little bit about because they look tougher than the implementation of some other regions. So after the crisis, Basel came out with some guidelines. All the different jurisdictions have implemented them in their own way. And the U.S. rules are pretty tough. We call it gold plating in terms of setting those standards.
In 5 years, do you see JPMorgan dominant in Europe?
I mean, they're pretty strong there now.
Exactly.
They're pretty strong there now. So I think that the most interesting thing for JPMorgan on the international front, people don't talk a lot about, but they're looking to expand their retail presence. They're looking to expand their retail presence in the UK, that will be the biggest.
We're cutting into Michael
for them.
Barr here. It's a digital retail experiment
Yes.
in the United Kingdom worked.
Yes. Well, they haven't talked about it a lot, but from what we hear, it's
Okay.
been meeting their metrics.
Allison, thank you so much. We can't wait for you to publish at Bloomberg Intelligence. Right to it with our news in New York City. Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Damian, and John. President Joe Biden has promised continuing support for Ukraine and says he will stay in the presidential race. Bloomberg's Ed Baxter has the story.
All eyes on him as NATO closed and he held a news conference. There were gaffes. He mistakenly referred to Vice President Harris as Trump.
Look, I wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be vice president, but I think she was not qualified to be president.
And he substituted the name Putin when introducing President Zelensky.
Now I want to hand it over to the president of Ukraine, who has as much courage as he has determination. Ladies and gentlemen, President Putin.
But he did say he needed to finish the job now and that things had changed since 2020.
The situation I inherited in terms of the economy, our foreign policy, and domestic division.
Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Radio.
Police in Houston, Texas have arrested a man who allegedly pistol whipped a fast food employee and was also wanted in connection to the ambush death of a Harris County deputy. Sheriff Ed Gonzalez.
We're able to create a perimeter. We're able to get prepared for entry, and at that point, suspect Palmer was able to exit the location without any further incident, where he was taken into custody.
Sheriff Ed Gonzalez says 44-year-old Ronnie Palmer allegedly shot and killed Deputy Fernando Esqueda, who was pursuing him after he allegedly assaulted someone at a Houston pizza restaurant. U.S. scientists believe they have discovered the cause of the disease lupus that may lead to a cure. Researchers at Northwestern Medicine and Brigham and Women's Hospital say they have found a molecular defect that promotes systemic lupus. The disease affects over 1.5 million people in the U.S. with life-threatening damage to organs, including the brain, heart, and kidneys. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Damian, John.
I mean, Michael, we got to get a life. I mean, Damian Walsh is in. He gets here 10 minutes before showtime. He's got his clubs with him. He puts them against the railing over by Tucker. And the noise you're making, are your drivers Callaway, or do you like the sound of the Cobra Dark Speed?
I have the TaylorMade Stealth, and for me, I'm a 9 degree, by the way, flex shaft. I'm not a stiff shaft kind of guy, so I like to have a little bit
more of a feel of a wooden
more
club.
of a feel, and I don't hit a really long ball. I'm just looking to go 275 straight away. So look, I mean, the reality is we got the British Open coming up next week. We got DeChambeau, Scheffler.
Come on, it's the only real course.
It's actually the Open now. It's not the British Open anymore, but it's going to be an awesome one. I mean, Royal Troon. I mean, I've not been out to. Have you ever been to Scotland before?
No, although Afterthough's there right now.
Oh,
I told her to show up. She's up at St. Andrews having a tough time of it.
Okay, Edinburgh. I've been to Edinburgh, but I've never gotten
we got to go. But why is the British Open, Damian Sassower, so special?
Well, it's links play, right? I mean, you would think it's not about hitting a long ball. It's about really playing that course, really being accurate, really, tossing darts, Tom. That's what we're talking about.
Okay, Damian Sassower with us, and we will speak of disinflation and deflation in China, really front and center. Huge political day. Anne-Marie Horton in conversation with the leadership of NATO in this hour. From New York City, this is Bloomberg Surveillance.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Earnings in the driver's seat today. In the early going, Wells Fargo pre-market, those shares down 5.3%. The bank warning it's not going to be able to whittle down costs as fast as it previously expected. The banking giant posting higher than expected expenses in the second quarter. And despite its results this morning, shares in the pre-market of JPMorgan Chase, they're down right now 0.8%. JPM reporting record profit. Investment bankers and their equity traders also smashing expectations. They also had a multi-billion-dollar gain tied to a Visa share exchange. Right now, the Dow futures 34 points higher. That's up about 0.1%. S&P E-mini futures a point higher. The Nasdaq futures after yesterday's over 2% sell-off for the tech-heavy Nasdaq. Right now, they are down 18 points. We check the markets for you all day long. Right here on Bloomberg Radio, I'm John Tucker. And that's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Damian, Tom.
John Tucker, thank you so much. Citigroup's scheduled to come out today. I'm going to be careful on that. I think it's a Friday, so Wells Fargo and JPMorgan came out 20 minutes early. You think, Damian, that's because they wanted to slide out the door on a Friday?
You know, I got to tell you this. This was just flagged by colleague Michael Moore. JPMorgan's $3.1 billion provision for credit losses was the highest since the early days of the pandemic. So, you know, I guess there is something there. There's, the world's ending.
It's a tea leaf there, and we'll see it again.
World's
Wells
ending.
Fargo on the chin, and Citigroup.
Party's over.
Fascinating. This is the interview of the day for me on all that's going on in Washington. I'll editorialize and say last night, whatever your political persuasion, was the most interesting, most important press conference in the history of the presidency of the United States. Terry Haynes has been fabulous on this, leading with the idea of watch the polls. Terry Haynes of Pangea, what will the polls do after the performance last night?
They'll continue to stabilize the way they already have, Tom. For all the blather about how Biden's tanking and this, that, and the other, the polls are relatively steady. One thing I pointed out last night was that in the last month, between June 11 and July 11, Biden's gone down by 2 points in the national, which is hardly had in the national two-way, which is hardly a big deal. And there are two polls this week, one from the Washington Post, one from NPR, indicating that that he's holding steady, and that's with all his trouble and his party, shaking.
Anne-Marie Horton at the press conference. Josh Wingrove, our White House correspondent, with a piercing question near the end of the press conference. Somebody, Terry Haynes, said, "What would you ask the president?" So I think, Damian, I should ask Terry Haynes what I would have asked President Haynes. And what I would have said, Terry, is at the margin, Mr. Biden, you're losing the black vote, you're losing the Hispanic vote. Every indication is you're losing the young Hispanic vote with a vengeance. What are you going to do about it? What's he got to do to get that turnout?
Well, Mr. Sassower, what I would say is, firstly, that I think all those are well in reach, and I think that, in the words of Harry Truman, if these people don't do their duty by the Democratic Party, they are the most ungrateful people in the world.
And what's so important here, Damian, and President Biden said that, he said it is so early in this election cycle in the defense of Joe Biden. Damian?
That's right, Tom. And look, I mean, Terry, you can call me DJ. My question for you is a simple one. I mean, is there any way the Democratic Party can actually get Biden to go without him having to agree to it? Is that a possibility here?
No.
So he's here forever. He's not going anywhere unless he chooses to.
He's there till he's not. There's two ways this goes, I think. One, Damian, one is that he has another problem of the magnitude of the debate, in which case, the Almighty will have called. The other way is, you've got, this is a bad Shakespearean play, and it's not even William Shakespeare. It's like Stevie Ray Shakespeare or somebody. It is, but the party elders really don't want to wield the knife. But what you've got in the background is two opportunities to do this at the convention. One is like this virtual convention they've been talking about for July. If you get a bunch of delegates to scream and wail about that, you might get it postponed. Even if you don't, you go to the actual convention, and it's not a done deal, because the first thing that has to happen at the convention is you have to adopt the rules of the convention that include binding the delegates. If you object to that and have a floor fight over whether or not you're going to free up the delegates or not, you've got that opportunity. But these people are going to have to show a lot more stones than they have so far, because they're not showing many.
Well, let's shift gears, Terry. Let's talk about next week. Let's talk about the Republican National Convention. What are you expecting as we move into next week? I mean, who's going to be the vice president candidate that he's looking for? I mean, what are we thinking here? Is that going to be the big news?
Yeah, I think it probably is. We've got, and I'll have a piece out over the weekend on what the platform means, other than it's the first platform all in bullet points and in all caps. But beyond that, the vice presidential pick is going to be the bellwether, and it's going to tell you whether Trump is interested in reaching out and unifying the party and appealing more to independents or not.
Interesting.
I don't think I'd buy the names that are out there. They're all plausible names, but I don't think I'd buy them. The way you know whether he's serious or not, I think, is whether he picks Haley or not, because she's the only candidate who can check both of those boxes.
Right.
And if not, you're going to get at best kind of a second-tier candidate along those lines.
Which state are you most focused on, Terry Haynes?
So I'm always most focused on Pennsylvania because, of course, because I'm from Pennsylvania. But it's and I've done a lot of politics in Pennsylvania. But it really is a bellwether in the sense that the traditional politics in Pennsylvania is whether or not Philadelphia and the suburbs overwhelm the rest of the state or not.
Right.
And we'll see how tight this race is based on how tight that is.
But this president, again, whatever your thoughts, he went to his wheelhouse, foreign policy. I'm going to editorialize and say nobody gets elected on foreign policy unless you're FDR in 1941. But Terry Haynes, if the 17th congressional district outside Pittsburgh was Connor Lamb, Joe Biden did I supported the unions with great emotion last night. He talked about the unions. He talked about the whole Pennsylvania job shtick. Did he sell the 17th district of Pennsylvania last night? They've got DeLuzio, whoever it is that took over for Connor Lamb, the Navy graduate, out there. Did he win that district last night?
I know that district and those people very, very well. Do I think he won the district? No, I don't think he won the district. But he gave the people on the ledge, the people that are on the fence but want to support Biden, a reason for staying on the ledge and not jumping off. And keeping them with them. So, they're there. But remember, those people in the 17th are also surrounded by a sea of red, everywhere from the district that I'm from to the south and, all around. What matters there is cutting into the red numbers.
Damian, jump in here.
Yeah, Terry, my last question for you is a simple one, right? I vote for Biden, and this is certainly the way I think of it, is I vote for the people around him, right? And are those same people that Biden has surrounded himself with more interested in their own future, in their own jobs? Are they telling him the truth about what people believe in his ability to lead this country for the next 4 years? Or is he just kind of running solo here? I mean, what are your thoughts?
That is an absolutely terrific question. I have talked privately with at least one of your colleagues about this, by the way, and what I said to your colleague was I think the Biden staff is not particularly loyal to Biden. The reason why I think that is because they're thinking about the next job, and I don't mean they're jumping ship tomorrow, but they're thinking about the next job. The next job is where the energy and the money is in the party. That's with progressives. The thing is, so they're wobbly, but the thing is, progressives right now are the strongest supporters of Biden within the Democratic coalition. So they probably stay around.
Terry Haynes, thank you for your support of Bloomberg Surveillance. Really, really appreciate it. I'm sure we'll touch bases next week. He's with Pangea Partners, and I can't say enough about the group that we've put together here in this heated time to try and be balanced about this historic moment. There's no other way to put it. Damian, on the markets, yesterday, all it is with JPMorgan today, earnings season is upon us.
Well, no, I think that 10-year real yield, you like to quote it all the time, it hit 192 at one point yesterday. It's back up to 197 here, but we're
at
down,
the range, we're there.
And we're below that 2% threshold. I think that's big news. I think you can't ignore it.
Rich, can we get a section of the show today where I can just talk to Damian, like, a minute or two? 10:05. We'll do that. Thank you. Damian Sassower with us. John Tucker as well. Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. It's earnings in the driver's seat for investors this morning in the pre-market. JPMorgan shares, they're down 1.2%, even after reporting record profit. You also had fees from investment banking, soaring past estimates, jumping 50%, while the firm's equity traders notched a 21% revenue jump. Wells Fargo, those shares in the pre-market, they are down close to 6%. It won't be able to whittle away costs as fast. Expenses for the quarter climbing 2%. Shares pre-market again down close to 6%. AT&T shares also falling. They're down 2.7%. Interesting story here. They suffered a massive hack of customer data. This is actually separate from the one that we told you about earlier this year. It included records of calls and texts for nearly all its mobile phone users. This was during a 6-month period in 2022. Only learning about this now in a regulatory filing AT&T put out this morning. And after yesterday's textile futures this morning, somewhat stabilized. The S&P futures up 1.5 points. The Dow futures up 33 points. NASDAQ futures right now are 12 points lower. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Damian, Tom.
John Tucker, thanks so much. Damian Sassower in for Paul Sweeney. I'm Tom Keene. Good morning. Really eclectic show coming up. Stay with us. We're on YouTube. Search out on Google. You go YouTube, Bloomberg Podcasts, and you subscribe to Bloomberg Podcasts out on YouTube, building every day. Really thrilled with that build out. I've been so busy this morning, I'm not even on the live chat yet. I'll get on that here in a moment. On Apple CarPlay as well, including 20 nations, all of which Midge Rahman writes about at Android Auto. This has been the toughest get for me in the last 10 days. I said to the team, I said, get me Midge Rahman. He's with Eurasia Group with Ian Bremmer, and he has been absolutely brilliant about the dynamics in Europe and what it means across the Atlantic to the United States. Midge Rahman joins us right now, Managing Director Europe at Eurasia Group. Midge, it seems like it's been a pretty good couple days for Mr. Macron. Lionel Laurent of Bloomberg told me the left would just fall apart within their acrimony and their debate, and that will allow the center in France to let the Fifth Republic survive. Do I have that right?
Well, thank you for the super kind introduction, Tom. I mean, I think that's what Macron would like. Whether or not he is able to deliver a centrist government, effectively an extension of his old administration, I think is a totally different question. It's true that the left is internally divided. There are 4 different bits of this left coalition, and they can't even align on who the prime minister should be, let alone what the policy agenda of a left-leaning government would be. And so if they ever were to form a government, it's likely they would disintegrate when they came into contact with reality. But whether Macron can also extend his own coalition and try and govern from the center is also a major question, right? Macron went backwards in this election. He lost shy of 100 seats. Les Republicans, the center-right, basically came in where they were.
Right.
There is no obvious governing majority in the next assembly. And so very hard for Macron to look at this result.
Right.
I think for the electorate to accept that Macron looks at this result and then effectively says,
right,
it will be as we were.
Take the synthesis of everything you and Ian Bremmer have worked on. What does all this signal to the United States as we get to the first Tuesday of November? If you look at the United Kingdom, Poland, India, if you look at France, even, even Italy, how do you bring that over to the populism of America?
Tom, it's a weakening Europe. I mean, it's a Europe that is riven by a populist resurgence in many countries. The far right didn't deliver a majority in France, but they went from 6 seats in 2017 to over 140 in 2024. So the trend line for Marine Le Pen and her far right group is absolutely clear. In the European elections, it's true that the center broadly held, but now Viktor Orban is providing leadership and spiritual guidance to a bunch of far-right groups all over Europe with an agenda to fundamentally undermine Europe and the integrity of the EU's institutions. There are regional elections in Germany in September. The far-right alternative for Deutschland will probably come first in all of those. That's a major challenge to the incumbent government led by Olaf Scholz. I think Trump will be looking at these developments and thinking there are very many allies with which he can play in the EU, and that on a common agenda, a common vision for Europe, a common policy program, it's going to be very hard to get alignment in light of some of these political developments that we're seeing, both at the European level, but also in member states.
Midge, I'm so happy you mentioned Viktor Orban of Hungary. I mean, as we know, Hungary is president of the Council of the EU for this rotating 6-month term. Brussels is highly critical of this visit. Is it a peace mission or is it something different?
No, it's not a peace mission. It's Orban wanting to play the statesman, to curry favor with Putin, and to signal to his domestic electorate that the Europeans are the bad guys, and I'm the guy advocating for peace. Look at what I'm doing. I'm trying to be a statesman, and I'm trying to advance diplomacy while the European Union is a warmonger. That's effectively what I think he's doing. It's about domestic politics. It's about Orban consolidating his rule over the European far right. There are two basic types of populism in Europe. There's the Giorgia Meloni model, the Italian prime minister, who wants to work within the system, who wants to effectively support von der Leyen and extract rents in return. And the rents that Meloni extracts are fiscal. She gets up to 188 billion in fiscal transfers from the EU. That's 10.5% of Italian GDP. And in exchange for that, she basically plays quite nice. She disagrees on some areas of policy, but she's basically constructive. The other variant of populism, what I call the ideological populist, Meloni is the tactical populist, is Viktor Orban. And Orban, as I said, his agenda is a very different agenda. Orban wants to unravel the EU. He wants to undermine it from within. He wants to undermine its institution.
Well, let me just interject right there.
That enables him to do that.
Mij, sure. I just have to ask you about Viktor Orban here because, from my perspective, I understand what you're saying. He's appealing to the pro-right across the whole of Europe, but really it comes down to domestic issues inside of Hungary. And as we know, Hungary's oligarchs are the core of the Fidesz base. Who is Viktor Orban really talking to? Is it domestic or is it something greater than that?
Well, I think he needs to consolidate the domestic electorate. But he also, as you suggested, there is a very important network that sustains his power, and Orban needs to service and oil that network, and he does that in part by playing the role of peace champion. Orban is playing cards at many tables. He's playing with the Chinese on foreign direct investment. He's playing with the Russians on energy. He's playing within Europe to extract financing and rents from the EU, keeping all of his options open. I think that's effectively Orban's game, but there isn't much support for it, at least at this stage in Europe. There's a lot of opposition to what he's trying to do.
Mitch, I saw a tweet this morning. I actually sent it to the team. One of the great supporters of Bloomberg Surveillance and Bloomberg on the Economy years ago was a brilliant, thoughtful economist named John Van Reenen. He's world-class, I think sort of Nick Booth out at Stanford and that crew. And he's going to be on a committee with the Labor government, the Economic Advisory Committee, whatever. He's going to be a worthy on the committee. Do you see a generational sea change in all the countries you follow where they're getting rid of the fossils like in America and they're actually bringing in young Turk talent and young Turk economists to begin to think about the future? Not an old guy like Ian Bremmer, but a young guy like Mitch Rahman.
Yes, look, Tom, I think Labour, this is a total sea change in the UK, right? We've had 14 years of Tory rule. They weren't really managing the economy. The Tory strategy was, where is debt to GDP in 5 years' time? And if it's falling, let's use that space, that fiscal space, to implement tax cuts today. That was the entire economic strategy of the outgoing Tory government, which is really no way to run a major G7 economy. Rachel Reeves and her team, they have come in, and what they're attempting to do, I think, is implement a much more coherent, thoughtful economic policy. One leg of that is going to be a major reset with Europe. Europe is a market of 450 million consumers, and there are major constraints on our ability to trade with the EU in light of the agreement that Boris Johnson struck. So I'm sure over the medium term, Labour will revisit that. But domestically, they also want to begin to implement structural reforms, things that unleash growth in the UK, and that may be planning reform. It may be the stuff that this council that you flagged, Tom, is going to be working on, and part of that will be the green transition. I think there will be a change to the EU's fiscal framework that the government can borrow for productive investment in green renewables, infrastructure, and so on and so forth. So I think it's part of that effort, and I think it's a very welcome development, frankly.
Got to run. Thank you so much on a Friday, Mitch Rahman, for joining us. He's with Eurasia Group. Absolutely definitive. Again, we protect the copyright of all of our guests. Get Mitch Rahman's great work. Do that at Eurasia Group. David Rosenberg publishes moments ago, he is my best on inflation. Inflation sinks and the Fed is behind the curve in a major way. That from David Rosenberg, Rosenberg Research, Toronto. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Damian, John. President Joe Biden vowed he would remain in the 2024 presidential race, but two notable flubs in the span of 2 hours deepened concerns about his mental acuity that threatened his campaign. The president drew gasps and instant mockery online when he mistakenly introduced Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky as Russian President Vladimir Putin at an event in the late afternoon.
And now I want to hand it over to the president of Ukraine, who has as much courage as he has determination. Ladies and gentlemen, President Putin. President Putin. He's going to beat President Putin. President Zelensky.
Then, at the opening of the press conference, he fumbled a question about Vice President Kamala Harris by saying he wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be vice president if he did not have confidence in her. Wendy Schiller, director of the Taubman Center for American Politics and Policy at Brown University, says she does not think the news conference was damaging.
Does he show that he's older? Yes, he does. But did he show that he had a pretty strong grasp of international relations, geopolitics? Yes, he did. You know, you ask yourself, would Donald Trump have been able to answer the questions for the same period of time with the same clarity, maybe not clearly, speech-wise, but knowledge-based? And the answer is probably no, that Donald Trump wouldn't have answered those questions the same way and wouldn't have been able to.
Wendy Schiller of Brown University. Former President Donald Trump met with Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, who traveled to Florida from the NATO summit. The Hungarian leader posted a photo with the Republican nominee at his Mar-a-Lago resort showing the pair giving a thumbs up. Orban is the closest EU leader to Russia. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Damian, John.
Okay, Michael Barr, hold my hand. You gotta hold my hand right now. Folks, if you could see the triple top secret internal memo that Damian Sassower crafts. Is it 5 days a week you do this?
I kind of try to update it when I can.
It is a pro 7-page dissertation on global relative interest rates and the swap market. And so right now, I'm going to do what I don't give a damn about Damian's golf game, Michael. I just want to talk to him about falling inflation,
1 year, 3 months,
opening the door to increased stimulus. What changed for Indonesia yesterday with the codification of American disinflation?
So what we're looking at, Tom, is 1 year forward, 3 month rates. Basically, what is the market pricing in 1 year's time? You know, and so we look at that and we say, my goodness, despite the fact that the world is looking for cuts by the Fed and the ECB, it seems like financial conditions in EM are expected to tighten in 1 year's time, which can mean a number of different things. But for me, it means that the consumer is going to be weaker and growth is going to come off. And that is really what I'm talking about here. As we move, the narrative shifts from inflation to growth. What does that mean for emerging markets?
I'm going to go Stanley Fischer on you, early 90s. Resilience in doubt as EM debt load rises to $18 trillion.
Yeah.
How fragile is their debt and deficits in local currencies?
It's just a number, Tom. I mean, really what it comes down to not is the total debt outstanding, but the total amount of external debt, that debt that's denominated in a currency other than the domestic currency, right? So external debt levels, they're at record highs. And so that's what I focus on. And I think really at the end of the day, you look at external debt, as a percentage of GDP or as a percentage of total debt. And again, what you see is external debt loads are rising. And that has more to do with the fact that the capital markets are opening up to emerging markets again after closing down during the pandemic. So I think that's a good thing.
I got to get this in. We reported yesterday we had no evidence of intervention by Japan. Now we can report it looks like there was a third intervention. All I could think of was Rudy Dornbush at MIT years ago. 0 for 1. 0 for 2 is just like people batting against that phenom of the Pittsburgh Pirates. Are they 0 for 3, go back to the dugout?
I think the markets really want to test 160 plus in dollar yen, and I think that's why it's a funding currency here. And so we just did a little analysis. We looked at the risk return profile for all of these crosses relative to the Japanese yen, and what you find is that it's looking a little bit better. It had come off for the better part of the last 6 months. I'm talking emerging market currencies, G10 currencies relative to the yen. Things are looking a little bit better here. The carry trade is alive and well, Tom.
Are people losing money now? Like I looked at the hedge fund report today from Bloomberg, and it's the usual distribution. There's some people killing it, There's people losing it. There's a lot of people in the middle making money. Is EM debt and EM equity a productive point of alpha forward?
They've had a good month, Tom. They really have. I mean, EM local debt was off almost 5+%. Just a month ago, now we're just down to a little over 1.5%. EM equities are up almost 10% year to date. I mean, I know it's not the S&P, but my goodness. I think, look, what you saw over the better part of the last month is a shift toward IT, telcos, discretionary. It was risk on. EM currencies have rallied over the last month. The Mex peso's doing well. It's ripping again. It's just a risk-on environment.
You and I mentioned export-import imbalances in China.
Yes.
Folks, the way this works is if you have exports big, imports small, your GDP goes up.
Yes.
Except, is it a false signal because that imports into China is so important?
That's right. Tom's talking about the China data overnight. We saw trade data. Imports came in weaker than expected. That's a weaker consumer inside of China. But my goodness, exports are up. And that means that you're seeing demand abroad increasing. So what does that mean when you see net exports rise? It means your GDP is going to rise. And so we have a GDP print coming out early next week out of China, 5+%. I think you're going to get it.
The general phrase here, the central banker to the world. How much on this Friday into July, into the heat of the summer, is Jerome Powell, the central banker to Modi's India, to Poland and Hungary, as you just mentioned, as well with their politics? How much is he central banker to the world?
Well, in 13 minutes, we're going to see the CPI print out of India. So we're going to see whether or not they can really keep a lid on. Oh, no, I'm watching.
Do you have a life? You're actually at home or on the golf course?
13 countries reported inflation.
India?
We saw Spain, Sweden overnight better than expected. France better than expected. I mean, inflation seems to be turning a corner here globally. And so when I say better than expected, I mean weaker than expected. It's going down, which is a good thing. And again, that means that the narrative is going to shift to growth. We now have the 22 major emerging market economies globally. Almost all of them are back within their explicit target range as defined by the central bank in terms of inflation being under control. So maybe it is time to inject a bit of stimulus.
Very good. Damian Sassower with us, and he'll continue with us providing coverage today. Paul Sweeney out on sabbatical. But we'll continue here with a lot of great guests. Robert Hormats coming up later. And Robert Hormats would tell you that NATO has been revolutionized. There's no other way to put it, with the addition of Scandinavia's Finland and Sweden. Providing leadership there has been the former Prime Minister of Norway, Jens Stoltenberg, who has been just rock solid in a voice of reason in the many cross currents of NATO. As we heard from President Biden last evening at these critical 75th anniversary meetings of NATO, now we hear from Jens Stoltenberg, again stepping aside. Mark Rutte is scheduled from the Netherlands to take over. But I think all will say that Jens Stoltenberg has done an extraordinary job. And I'll tell you, for those of you younger, just the psychology of particularly Finland, with their massive Russian border, being part of NATO now, has been, not the shock of the losses of life, both by Russia and Ukraine in the war, and civilians as well, but on a political basis, to see Finland join Jens Stoltenberg's NATO has been absolutely, no other way to put it, absolutely exceptional. They are in Washington, the elite gathered, many may be heading home right now. Here is our Anne Marie Horton in conversation with the former Prime Minister of Norway, Jens Stoltenberg of NATO.
The actual policies that were discussed this week is, of course, the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg, and this was his final NATO summit. You're going to be retiring in the fall. You've been at the helm for a decade, so you've seen a lot. We're going to get into some of those distractions that were happening at the summit, but I want to get into some of the policies. We just heard President Biden there talking about the limits they've placed on Ukraine about striking deeper into Russia. He basically said they don't want to give him capacity to hit the Kremlin. But Zelensky is asking to attack Russian jets on Russian air bases that strike Ukrainian cities. Do you get the sense that the U.S. doesn't trust Zelensky?
Well, first of all, the U.S. and other allies have loosened the restrictions they have imposed on the use of the weapons they have donated to Ukraine. So Ukraine is now able to also strike against military targets inside Russia. And we need to remember what this is. This is a war of aggression. Russia has attacked Ukraine. That's violation of international law. Ukraine has the right, according to international law, to defend themselves. And that includes also striking legitimate military targets inside the territory of Russia. And some allies have given them that permission. Other allies have some restrictions, but they have been loosened up a bit.
But of course, the most important ally sending the most weaponry is the United States. And they've only said you can go about 40 kilometers. But to really, Zelensky's point is to really start to push back the Russians and be defensive, they need to get on top of it, meaning going maybe 300 kilometers. Do you think, I mean, you were part of these discussions, do you think this is something the United States, we've seen them before drag their feet and then make decisions that Zelensky was pushing for. Could you see them coming around to this?
This was an issue that was discussed at the NATO summit. And again, some allies have no restrictions on the use of the weapons they have delivered. Others have restrictions but have loosened them. The U.S. is, of course, important, but half of the military support to Ukraine comes from non-U.S. allies, comes from Europe and Canada. So when it comes to Ukraine, the Europeans have really stepped up, and with the decision we made at the NATO summit to have a long-term pledge and to have a formula for burden sharing, we will ensure that also in the future European allies and Canada will provide half of the military support because they have half of the economic strength of the alliance.
Ukraine didn't get the formal invitation they were hoping for. So they are still at the gates, knocking on the door, and they're not let into NATO just yet. While they do this, though, it unnerves Putin. Do you think they're, in a sense, almost the worst position, this security purgatory, because they're still stuck in the middle, because they're not yet an alliance, but even asking to be an alliance really underscores the issue that they're having with their neighbor next door?
At the summit, allies were very clear that Ukraine will become a member. We also stated that this is a reversible path towards a membership, but actually as important, or perhaps even more important than the language in the statement we agreed, is that actually we took actions to move Ukraine closer to membership. We established a NATO command with 700 personnel to organize the provision of training and military support to Ukraine. We agreed this long-term pledge, and we stepped up the work to do what we call interoperability, to ensure that Ukrainian forces are fully interoperable with NATO forces. These are concrete actions that actually helps them to prevail, to help Ukraine to prevail as a sovereign, independent nation in Europe. And all of that moves them closer to membership. And then when the time is right and allies agree, they will become members straight away.
As you know, politics overshadowed this summit. Everyone was talking about, if not officially, unofficially, President Biden's age. As the NATO Secretary General, who's worked with both of these U.S. presidents who are the candidates for November, do you see potential change in the future U.S. commitment to the alliance?
I expect that the United States will remain a strong NATO ally also in the future for at least three reasons. One is that this is in the U.S. security interest to have a strong NATO. In NATO, the United States has something Russia and China doesn't have, more than 30 friends and allies. Second, it's very strong bipartisan support in the United States for NATO. In the public, we have seen new opinion polls also confirming that, but also in the U.S. Congress. I met congressmen from both parties, and they all expressed some strong support to NATO. And thirdly, the main criticism from former President Trump and others have actually not been against NATO. It has been against NATO allies not spending enough on NATO, and that has changed. Over just the last years, we have seen a significant increase in the number of allies spending at least 2% of GDP on defense, which is the NATO guideline.
So is your expectation to ignore potentially your expectations that Trump's rhetoric will not match his policies on the ground?
Well, I worked with him when he was Prime President last time, and again, I expect that the United States will remain a strong NATO ally, because this also makes the United States safer and stronger. The United States is big, 25% of the world's GDP, but together with NATO allies, we are 50% of the world's GDP, twice as big, 50% of the world's military might, and this makes the United States stronger. And the main criticism, the fact that European allies didn't spend, that has really changed. 23 allies spending 2%, and those allies are not yet at 2%, have a promise to be there soon. So this has really improved, not least because the criticism from the United States was valid, and Europeans have heard the call and have stepped up.
Jens Stoltenberg, thank you so much for your time. That was, of course, John, Jens Stoltenberg, the outgoing NATO chief.
Mr. Stoltenberg of NATO there, and again, the president speaking last night at the 75th meetings of at NATO. Truly historic. One thing to do here with Damian Sassower in the time that we've got here to the top of the hour. We welcome all of you on YouTube, Android CarPlay, and Android Auto and Apple CarPlay. Is just go to trade-weighted U.S. dollar. You can do that nominally. You can do that real. But Damian, I got to get out of the way here. The inflammatory garbage we're going to see this weekend. OMG, the dollar is strong. It's like we need a Plaza Accord, whether it's done at the Park Hyatt in Rome or it's done at the Park Hyatt in Shanghai. It's just really not that bad. It's not Plaza Accord, Louvre Accord dollar strength, is it?
No, I don't think so. And I think positioning is kind of cleaned out a little bit. I mean, again, if you're a currency practitioner, you're probably not looking at trading individual currencies relative to the dollar. You're probably looking for cross currencies, specifically within G10, which we've seen a lot of divergence, like Noki Stoki, for example. Just, the fact that Sweden's basically going to be cutting more and Norway's actually leaning a little bit hawkish. And, you're seeing some of these trades sort of manifest itself and you're seeing positioning and those crosses increase.
I mean, I look at the politics of this with Jens Stoltenberg and Mark Rutte coming in for NATO, and the answer is a dollar strength. And President Trump, if he's elected here for a second term, not day one, but maybe day three, President Trump is going to say the dollar's too strong.
You think?
Is it?
I don't know. I mean, look, the Bloomberg Dollar Index is up 3.3% year to date. So I know broad trade weighted U.S. dollar, but I mean, 3.3%, that's not a whole hell of a lot after last year's correction. So from my perspective, yeah, it's very difficult to position for dollar weakness. Right. But at the same time, where if you look at the market and what they're forecasting in terms of U.S. yields, and that the carry trade's really been leading, that's the model that's been driving currency performance, so certainly spot FX. Yeah, I can see a bout of dollar weakness here, and I can see that extending into the year end. So, we'll see.
For our audience, listening, watching, it's just real simple. Into the rest of the year, into 2025, do you have a global disinflationary or outright deflationary tendency? That's like an IMF question.
Yeah.
For the spring meetings.
I think it's the geopolitical risk element which people are underestimating, right? I mean, the fact is, look, we have Bastille Day in France on Sunday. We have Marine Day in Japan. It's a holiday on Monday. But look, we have the Republican National Convention coming up, and that's going to be a big market mover in my opinion.
Why will that be a big market
because,
mover?
Look, I didn't even think about it, but imagine if he gets Nikki Haley to
well, that's what Terry Haynes said.
Yeah, Terry Haynes said that, and I didn't even think that was a possibility the way Nikki Haley spoke about him during the primary. So we'll see. But I think that would appeal to a lot of investors, and I think it'd be really hard. Voters, and I think it'd be really hard for the Democratic Party to overcome that.
Okay, you having fun here on a Friday?
I'm having so much fun. I got up super early.
The heat finally broke. What's it like doing 18 holes in the heat we've had the last 10 days?
Well, I was in the Hamptons for the past few weeks. We had a little bit of beach. We were at Cooper's Beach. There were dolphins out there.
John Tucker, what is this? Sweeney alive, Sassower in the Hamptons for a week. And what are you and I doing, John?
I got to fill in for 3 people today.
Look, what I was going to say.
Did we get an invite to his Hamptons place?
No, we didn't.
You didn't want to be at my Hamptons place. There's a little bit of drama there. But anyway, look, let me continue by just saying this. My tan is, it's fading. It's not what it once was.
We noticed you were peaked as you came in.
I've tried to wear a white shirt.
You look like the lead singer of The Cure. That's what you look like. Damian Sassower looks like the guy.
Boys don't cry.
Hair. Stay with us, folks. Great show coming up here on a Friday.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
We're addicted to the parlor game, the Fed, the monetary ballet.
Where do you see opportunities in that fixed income space here in 24?
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
AI affecting demand for cloud computing.
And Michael Barr with news.
Another legal setback for Donald Trump, this time across the pond.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. Tom Keene, Paul Sweeney, Michael Barr, Lisa Mateo. I don't even know who's in today. It's a Friday. Mateo's on a plane somewhere. She got the Gulfstream, I think. I think she's going north to see Carol Massar.
Yeah, maybe.
Tim Stenberg. Damian Sassower, you know that voice. He's in for Paul Sweeney, and it's a perfect day to have Damian, really brilliant there on EM, the challenges, the news out of China, booming exports. Is that all EVs? Is it basically like EVs is their exports?
It's definitely it's manufactured goods. It's electronics.
Yeah,
I mean,
the old formula.
Yeah, it's the old formula. Sure. I mean, look, I think really at the end of the day, China's got some real issues. We got the plenum coming up next week. It's the third China plenum. So let's talk about what happened in 2018 during the last plenum, Tom. That was when term limits were eradicated in China, and President Xi became the president
forever.
Forever. So some big news could come out of China over the next 5 to 7 days, and no one's markets aren't priced for it.
I agree. I strongly agree with that. As we look at the plenum, John, next time you and I are up in the famed Bloomberg food court, looking at a chill cup of coffee, we'll call that a plenum.
Okay.
It'll be good. Bloomberg Surveillance this morning. It's brought to you by IBKR. Financial advisors switch to Interactive Brokers for lowest cost global trading and turnkey custody solutions. No ticket charges, no conflicts of your interests at ibkr.com/RIA. And we thank IBKR Interactive Brokers for foundational support of what we do in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. Right now from the Interactive Broker Studios with our Bloomberg Business Flash, John Tucker.
All right, bank earnings, just hearing from Citigroup. Just down second quarter fixed sales and trading revenue, $3.56 billion. That is a miss. The estimate was for $3.61 billion. Again, FIC trading revenue, $3.56 billion. The biggest U.S. bank that was earlier today, JPMorgan, reporting record profit. Their equity traders notching a 21% revenue jump. Fees from investment banking, that soared. Shares pre-market down about 1%, though. And then big miss from Wells Fargo earlier. They're getting punished. Those shares pre-market, they were down 6%. Expenses for the quarter climbing 2%. That compares with a 0.2% increase that analysts had expected there. Investors seem to be realizing there's more to the market than tech stocks. Tech-heavy NASDAQ dropping over 2% in yesterday's trading. That money rotating into smaller stocks. Russell 2000, home to some of the less exciting names. That soared 3.5%. And futures this morning, right now, they're pretty much unchanged. S&P E-mini futures up a point. The Dow futures 25 points. NASDAQ futures right now, they are down 13 points. And 2-year yield unchanged. That's at 450. The 10-year comes ahead of the PPI at 830 at 421. Pretty much unchanged there. We check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that is your Bloomberg Business Flash. Damian and Tom.
Thanks so much, John Tucker. Greatly appreciate it. About 4 or 5 days ago, I just started screaming, "Get me Whitney, get me Whitney." If you're in the money business, there is exactly one Whitney. He is Whitney Tilson, and to put things in perspective, we'll sit over a beverage of our choice and go, gee, someday I think I'll climb Kilimanjaro.
Oh, right.
He's actually climbed Kilimanjaro. The academics are bulletproof. He's a Baker Scholar, which it's like playing for Billy Cleary at Harvard hockey.
I mean, yeah.
It's like a Baker Scholar.
He's the world's toughest mutter, 50 and older, too.
And he's been on fire. The author of Port Charlie's Almanac, The Wit and Wisdom of Charles T. Munger. Whitney Tilson has been on fire about his Democratic Party. Let me make clear, he is a supporter of Democratic politics. Whitney, thank you so much for joining. You've been a voice of sanity for Republicans and Democrats out on Twitter. How'd the president do last night?
Well, let me give you a football analogy. If I told you that, hey, your favorite quarterback, your favorite team just completed a 10-yard pass, you'd say, great, moves the chains, one step closer to victory. But what if I told you that you're down by 14 with 2 minutes to play at the 50-yard line and your quarterback has an obviously sprained ankle, if not a broken leg? Then you'd say, oh my God, that's terrible news that we completed a 10-yard pass because it's a hopeless situation. Our only chance of victory is a couple Hail Mary passes. So completing a 10-yard pass actually reduces our chances of victory. So I hope that's not too complex of an analogy. Right. But Biden was solid last night, couple little gaffes, but The problem is it did nothing to dispel the concerns of 80% of American people that he's too old for the job, and basically the belief of now every single Democrat in Congress that he needs to step aside to give us any chance of beating Trump in November.
Whitney, I observed firsthand the Kennedy clan at a Democratic convention at Boston Garden look across at a senator from Illinois, a kid from Chicago, take the trophy. This is when Obama rose to national presidents versus an elderly, aging Ted Kennedy as well. That dialogue, that tension, Whitney Tilson, of the Democratic convention, as in Chicago soon, seems to have evaporated into an elite, almost tribal class. Now, you're on the edges of that. You're a donor, et cetera. But does your party, and frankly the Republicans, do they need to get back to an older, more fractious convention process?
Well, look, I'm actually looking forward to when Biden steps aside, and at this point, it's a question not of if but when. I think it's now 95% likely that he will step aside. And then I think it would be a disastrous decision to simply anoint Kamala Harris. I'm all in for supporting her if she earns it and can demonstrate that she's got the ideas, vision, can capture the imagination of the American people, and one, beat Donald Trump, and two, be a great president. But there are also at least a dozen, if not 20 other people whose names are being tossed around. And I think there should be an incredibly exciting free-for-all. Yes, chaotic, but it would rivet the attention of the nation, energize the Democratic Party. And then in the next 5 weeks going into the convention, hopefully we've narrowed that down. And what we're looking for, to your point there, is someone who catches lightning in a bottle the way Obama did. And can ride, becomes the clear front runner, can ride that to not just, I don't want to just beat Donald Trump. I want to beat him like a rented mule and throw him on the dustbin of history where he belongs. So that's what I'm looking for. Now, maybe we don't get that. But right now, I think Biden's got a 15% chance of beating Trump. If you just told me, hey, we can find somebody who makes it a jump ball, it's 50-50. That's a massive improvement from sticking with the, I want to switch horses if I can shift the odds that much, but maybe we can get it up to 80 or 90% and really beat Trump.
Well, Whitney Tilson, what you're suggesting here is that the Democratic Party will not go to its backup quarterback. I mean, that's interesting. So then what do? Do they go to the free agency? Yeah. I mean, do they go to Tilson? I mean, Pritzker? I mean, Newsom? Who do you suggest here? Who's the favorite?
Honestly, I don't know. And I probably know half of the 20 candidates who might throw their hats in the ring personally, but all 20 are incredible. The Democrats have an incredible bench. So to use a football analogy again, we've got a chance to hit the reset button. And instead of being down by 14 with 2 minutes to play, we can start the game all over again. So right there, that's great news. Secondly, our quarterback with a broken leg is out. So we got to find a new quarterback. Right. Now, we've got a long-time backup, but a lot of questions about whether that backup is the best quarterback. So we've got 5 weeks to have a training camp, and we put the word out. Anyone who thinks they can be quarterback of our team, come to our training camp, and we're going to show us what you got. And if Kamala Harris can, emerges from that process as the one most likely to beat Trump and most likely to beat the great president, then I'm all in. But she or whoever earns that job, they have to earn it.
Whitney, I got to be quick here. It's a huge news day. I got to get to Michael Barr. You and Michael Porter were definitive in studying how to jumpstart inner cities. The Democrats are losing Black and Hispanic youth to Republicans. How does President Biden or whoever runs, how do they get back at the margin Black and Hispanic youth?
Yeah, Mel, it's a good question. At the end of the day, I think young and especially young minority voters are inclined to vote on the Democratic ticket, but they share the same concerns that 80% of Americans share. That, a year ago, the majority of voters said, we don't like either of these guys. The message to both parties was, give us somebody fresh and new and exciting. We don't like either of these guys. And now only one party has the opportunity to deliver to give the American people what they've asked for. So I think if we do that, a wide swath of voters, not just young and minority voters, are going to vote Democrat and carry us to victory in November.
Whitney Tilson, thank you so much for joining us today. Clearly a Democratic donor and supporter, of course, legendary within hedge fund work and also as academics out of Harvard University. Futures up to a little bit of green on the screen this morning. Important PPI data in 20 minutes. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Damian, John. President Joe Biden held a solo news conference as he wrapped up the NATO summit. He made some flubs, referring to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky beforehand as President Putin, and then calling Kamala Harris Vice President Trump. However, Biden touted the importance of the NATO alliance and called out former President Trump.
My predecessor has made it clear he has no commitment to NATO. He's made it clear that he would feel no obligation to honor Article 5. He's already told Putin, and I quote, "Do whatever the hell you want." In fact, the day after Putin invaded Ukraine, here's what he said. It was genius.
Biden insisted he is not leaving the race even as a growing number of Democratic lawmakers ask him to step aside. Actor Alec Baldwin's involuntary manslaughter trial continues in New Mexico. Hannah Gutierrez-Reed, who served as the set's armorer and has already been sentenced to 18 months in prison, is expected to be called to the stand later today. Meanwhile, a crime scene technician testified that live bullets were discovered mixed in with the dummy rounds in several places on the set of Rust. Baldwin's team stressed that live bullets should have never been on the movie set. A Florida woman who was facing more than a decade in prison in Turks and Caicos is home. Sharita Greiter arrived in Orlando last night after receiving a 23-week suspended sentence and a $1,500 fine. Turks and Caicos officials found ammunition in her luggage back in May, a violation of the country's strict weapons laws. Greiter has advice for other tourists.
Check their luggage. Just be careful. Be very careful. Because the other states, other countries got different laws than we do. So that's very serious.
Greiter was the fifth American to face similar charges in Turks and Caicos. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr, and this is Bloomberg. Tom, Damian, John.
The west coast is Scotland, not Edinburgh, Glasgow. It's tougher, it's windier, like the west coast of Ireland. Royal Troon, it's like a wasteland. You don't just go out there. It's not like Oak Hill and Rochester or something. This is tundra.
A lot of brush, a lot of fescue. I mean, that's where, I'm a Scotch drinker. I like the peatier. I like an Islay, not really a Speyside guy. So I think that's you get a good Islay out there. It keeps you warm at night.
Does the wind go down? How do you play golf? How do you play championship golf with the wind? You got to everyone's got to be shorter.
You got to club up or be short. It depends which way the wind's blowing, Tom. You know this. I mean, either clubbing up or clubbing down. Maybe it's a 2-club wind, a 1-club wind. You got to make some calls there.
Do you have that putter, the high-tech putter that they've been touting?
No, but I have been going through different putter grips. I had a big one, an oversized one. Now I'm back to a small one. I mean, I got these small little hands, and I don't know. I just gotta. It's like holding a baby. I don't know.
Later this hour, the Sassower again. Can he get under a 90? From New York, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker, the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Maybe simplification is paying off over at Citigroup. Shares right now up over 2%. The earnings release a little earlier this morning. Second quarter revenue, $5.1 billion. That is up from $4.7 billion expected by analysts. This is because of higher equities revenue than projected. Broken down, you have $3.6 billion for fixed income and commodities trading, $1.5 billion for equities. That's actually a big beat for equities. That was expected to come in around $1.1 billion for Citigroup. At the biggest of the banks, JPMorgan Chase reporting record profit. Equity traders there notching a 21% revenue jump. Fees from investment banking, they also soared. Shares this morning, they paired some of the earlier losses. Right now they're down 0.4%, and a miss for Wells Fargo. They got punished. Shares pre-market down 5.3%. After that tech-led sell-off on Wall Street yesterday, traders now awaiting the next batch of inflation data. We get the producer price index. We'll deliver that to you live with analysis starting at 8:30 Wall Street time, less than 15 minutes. And right now we have the NASDAQ futures. They are 19 points lower. S&P E-mini futures up 1 point, and the Dow futures are 50 points higher. A 2-year yield right now ahead of the PPI, down a basis point. We're at 450. We check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Damian and Tom.
John Tucker, thanks so much. I want to do two concepts here. We're trying to get Gerard Cassidy in with us. He's at a lobster bake-off, the lobster omelet in Portland, Maine. That's what Gerard's doing. I got Damian Sassower with me, which is a good and beautiful thing. Damian, I got a blur of 80 headlines in front of me, and what I see, and folks, I can't say this enough worldwide, all of these banks are different. I got Jane Frazier's Citigroup with a sub 7% return on equity, and Jamie Dimon's trying to hide how profitable he is with a 23% return on equity. Don't quote me on that, but it gives you a single-digit scale versus massive double-digit scale. Why are these banks so different? Who's doing what right? But critically, who's doing what wrong?
Well, it's their evolution, right, Tom? I mean, in the case of Citigroup, Citigroup has really been a sort of an intermediary globally, right? And I'm talking payments, settlements, FX, that's been their specialty. And they moved away from that, obviously, over the better part of the last decade. But now they're leaning into that. And I think that core competency is going to carry them well in the environment we're going into. In the case of JPMorgan, look, they're just the biggest, baddest bat on the street. And, they're going to continue to be that way until someone knocks them off the top of that mountain with Jamie Dimon running the show there. And just, it's just going to be very difficult.
How much was the lobster salad, the lobster roll out in the Hamptons? Did you have one?
So, at Cooper's Beach, they did have lobster rolls. I didn't have one myself. It didn't look to be to my liking, but the warm lobster rolls at Boswick's are delicious. We had a few of those.
Price point?
I prefer not to. And then basically,
I gotta have a Cassidy.
It's a $16 warm lobster roll. It definitely is, and that's probably on the cheap side. I think really what you're asking is how much money I won in backgammon out there over the last week. I crushed it in backgammon.
Did you crush it?
Crushed it. Tutto DiGiorno, late night. Me and Donna Karen were just rolling dice.
You can bet on that?
Backgammon?
Oh yeah.
Oh my God!
Can?
You don't play with the doubling cube?
That's how Dan Lowe.
Is it legal?
No, that's how Dan Lowe bought 6,000 square feet out there. Let's get to our guest. Joining us now, Gerard Cassidy from Portland, Maine, on bank earnings. But Gerard, I got to go. I saw a $30 lobster roll in the Hamptons. How is the lobster season down east?
Actually, Tom, the prices have come down a bit, so lobster rolls are nowhere near $30 up here. Obviously, you have to pay that higher price at the end of Long Island, though.
Okay, well, that's, I guess, a good, beautiful thing. You've been doing this, Gerard Cassidy, with Tucker Anthony and R.L. Day and RBC since time began. Why are these banks so different? Is it just they're damaged from the great financial crisis? I got a 23% ROE JP Morgan-ish, and I got a 6-ish, 7-ish ROE Citigroup. Why are they so disparate?
A couple of reasons, Tom. First, we got to back out of JP Morgan, the giant Visa gain that they reported in the quarter. But still, to your point, you are directionally correct. that JPMorgan's ROTCE, return on tangible common equity, greatly exceeds that of Citigroup. Citigroup's a turnaround story. As you know, they've struggled over the years, and Jane Fraser is now simplifying the franchise, trying to streamline it, trying to make it more profitable. She's making good progress, a long way to go. But JP Morgan has been a fine-tuned machine for a number of years under the leadership of Jamie Dimon. And those numbers show out as we're seeing today. They're very strong in, as you know, investment banking, capital markets, but they have the diversified revenue stream that is quite positive with the consumer business and the wealth management business as well.
Gerard, what's your read through on credit quality here? You know, JP Morgan provision for credit losses, I think it was pretty high. You know, are you seeing anything in terms of credit card delinquencies, in terms of the consumer?
It's a good question. And JP Morgan's provision for credit losses was greater than expected. Now, they've been telegraphing all quarter that the consensus numbers were too low on the provision, so it shouldn't come too much as a surprise. But what they did point out is that about half of the increase in the credit card portion of the reserve build was due to changing macro data. And so I think what you're seeing is as the economy slows down, unemployment trickles up a bit, they're going to assume, you know, higher credit losses. But the guidance they're still giving is around 3.4% for credit losses in credit cards, which is not materially different than the prior quarter. So yes, the low-end consumer, the credit card numbers, charge-offs were higher. But the other interesting point about this is the delinquency numbers in credit cards in this quarter. 30-day delinquencies were lower than the prior quarter. So I think we're seeing a cresting of the losses, maybe second or third quarter of this year.
Well, Gerard, let's take that to the next level. Commercial real estate finance, CRE. You know, talk to us about, you know, some of the things we're seeing there. I know Wells had some exposure there. What is coming? I mean, what is the read through, not just to the big banks, but the medium and small size ones as well?
No, you put your thumb on the real credit issues for the industry. Commercial real estate office, particularly in large urban markets, with Class B and C buildings being the weakest of all. You saw that at Wells's numbers. They break it out very clearly for everybody. About 18% of their office portfolios in non-accrual. They have reserves of over 11% in that portfolio, and they saw further deterioration this quarter. So I think what you're going to see is companies that have big exposures to downtown office in our biggest cities, and those are the ones that are struggling.
Gerard, 15 seconds, single best buy right now.
Single best buy for the big banks, Tom, you got to go with Bank America. I think, especially if you believe the Fed's going to cut rates this year, Bank America is going to be the biggest beneficiary.
Gerard, you're like huge on the live chat on YouTube. This is Josh. Boston, Gerard, is a city south of Portland, in case you didn't know that. Lobster rolls, super cheap. I live south of Boston, and the seafood restaurants around here have 2 lobster roll sizes. Regular, which is 30-ish, and then a colossal 8-ounce roll for Damian Sassower that's $60. I tell you, Gerard, we got to do a road trip up to see Cassidy. I mean, can you see us?
Yeah. I'll take you to Town Landing Market, and we'll get it for $20.
There we go. Get 'em multiple rolls.
The lobster roll. I mean, lunch. I mean, if you go to lunch in Southampton, you'll probably get dinged for a $30 lobster roll also. But God,
yeah,
it's
but
what's
the Cosmopolitan cost you with the umbrella in it? $45.
Well, you're discounting the fact that they have great chowder. I mean, you can't beat a great. You like that?
Your Boston. That's very good. That's wicked good. Wicked
pesky
good.
pole. Wicked.
Gerard Cassidy, honored to have you with us today from Portland, Maine, an institution, serious work on the major and also the regional banks. We always talk these big banks and his buy there on Bank of America, given Fed policy, but there's a lot of other work going on at RBC Capital Markets. Let me get the data red and green on the screen after the oddities of yesterday. And yes, yesterday was really odd. Still, small caps surging as they did yesterday, maybe a big short cover up 1.2% on the Lori Calvasina index. Good to see that as well. Damian mentions the real yield. I agree. 1.95% on a 10-year real yield, really sitting on the base of the range. Anything under about a 193 is a huge close on the 10-year real yield. We are on YouTube. Subscribe to Bloomberg Podcast. This is Bloomberg Surveillance.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Mixed a little change for the futures right now. Bank earnings in the driver's seat for now. Wells Fargo sinking, warning it won't be able to whittle away costs as fast as forecast. JPMorgan Chase fluctuating after reporting record profit. They missed on a few key metrics like net interest income. Citigroup just had them climbing about 3%. Equities trading there, beating estimates. And more inflation data, your PPI pair, the inflation twins, Damian and Tom. Over to you guys.
Thank you. Good to have that. Thank you so much, John Tucker. Numbers out, and we don't get a negative statistic. In fact, we get a modest lift here. Now, core PPI, month over month is flat, 0. I'll take that as a point of news. The market's churning off this, trying to figure out what it all means. Critically, we get the revisions, and the disinflation of last month drifts away. There's no other way to put it. And in the bond space, the Damian Sassower space, you see yields higher, up 2 basis points. So, Damian, it gives back a little bit of the disinflationary dance of yesterday.
Yeah, I think this is reflecting. I mean, look, logistics, supply costs have actually gone up. I mean, energy costs have gone up. I mean, this has been a big month for energy. So I think that's largely reflected in this PPI data. But again, the markets don't really care. We care about CPI.
What's global shipping doing right now? That's something you dive into on an hourly basis.
No, yeah, the cost for freight have actually gone up. Freight insurance, I think, has gone up on the month. So this is just a June print. So it's month over month. And I think, we saw a bit of an acceleration there.
Going to year over year right now, and I'm going to look at year over year PPI ex food and energy. 2.3% last month becomes 2.6%, big revision up. In the present statistic published moments ago is 2.5%, was a survey, no, a higher PPI ex food and energy, 3%. So that's the market, and that's the move you're seeing in the bond market. And the tips that Damian and I both believe in, 10-year real yield goes 194.95 out to 198. So a higher regime. Joining us now, expert on this, truly expert, Dana Peterson, chief economist at the Conference Board. Does PPI matter now, Dana, like CPI yesterday?
Well, yes and no. PPI is good for understanding what's in the pipeline, but we know that businesses don't always pass all of that on. But I think, yes, CPI is really important. It portends what we might see in the PCE deflator later on this month. And again, the Fed is looking for insurance, or at least assurance, that inflation is coming back down steadily to its 2% target.
Is there a supply logjam, to take the thunder away from Damian Sassower? Is there an oddity out there in how we manufacture our business inflation?
Well, just looking at the PPI for final demand, yes, overall it's up, and it's really being driven by something Damian already mentioned, energy and also food. So those are goods. But also when you take away food and energy and you look at the core, it's services away from transportation and warehousing. Those prices are still rising pretty aggressively. So again, that's kind of a canary in the coal mine that we need to watch to make sure that it doesn't get passed down.
Extremely well said. And Damian, this is Kathy Jones and Schwab had a beautiful chart off Bloomberg yesterday. The core services dance yesterday was disinflation. I'm not seeing that this morning.
Well, Tom, I mean, for me, it's really, what is core services in the PPI print? Educate me, educate our audience, Dana. What are you looking at if it's not trade? What are those elements that are driving the services, the core services in PPI?
Well, I think a lot of it is wages. We know that there's still pretty significant labor shortages, especially in those industries that are on the front lines, or you have to show up in person. And when we talk to our businesses, our CEOs of big companies are saying, yes, we're raising wages and we're passing that on to the consumer. We're also passing it on to our other business partners down the supply chain. And yes, that's showing up in the services inflation for consumer prices.
Well, we've got Brent crude up 3% year to date. Copper's up 14% year to date.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. Gold is up 13%. But I mean, look, the reality, Dana, is this. I mean, should we be looking at some of those as proxies for what PPI is going to do? Should we be looking at industrial metal prices? Should we be looking at energy prices? Is that really what's going to drive inflation over the near term?
I think so. Certainly, when you look at energy, everybody needs it. We're definitely in the summer season where energy prices are higher because there's just more demand. And then there's still also the ongoing issues abroad that are influencing overall energy prices that kind of feed back to the United States.
And then finally, I guess for me, is if we aren't really going to be focused on inflation now that the CPI and PPI prints are behind us, what comes next, Dana? What are you focused on?
Well, I'm certainly focused on the upcoming data, retail sales, also labor market data. All those things are important, but I am still looking at inflation, right? We haven't reached the goal yet, and so I think we need to continue to monitor everything here.
Yeah, Dana Peterson, you have a window into corporate America, the heritage of the conference board. What are CFOs not so much worried or challenged about, but what is the distinction of their thinking into the summer, the chief financial officers of our corporations?
Well, they're still very focused on input costs and also the cost of capital. They're not happy that interest rates are where they are. They're not really falling. And so those are the things that are really vexing them from day to day. There's also a lot of uncertainty around regulation. What's the tax outlook going to look like after 2025? And so those are the big issues that they're focused on.
What do you see now the Fed action to be? I mean, the parlor game, I guess, is September, but can you got to help me here, Dana. I got to get to the end of July. Can I get the Fed to cut rates end of July and stun people?
I don't think so. I think they need more evidence, right? And the key thing is, yes, everyone's focused on
what
CPI.
Evidence? Stop. What evidence do they need? I'm going to be, a mini David Rosenberg. One of his kids wears a bow tie, so we get away with this. Dana Peterson, what more evidence do they need?
The PCE deflator. That's what they base their policy on. So if we see the good news in the CPI reflected in the PCE deflator later on this month, then I think that's further evidence. They're also watching the labor market. Yeah, it's cooling a little bit, but it's going from raging to robust. And so I think they're going to be watching that, and also what GDP does in the second quarter. I mean, we really dialed down activity in the first quarter. Does that continue? And I think all these pieces matter for the Fed in terms of whether they're going to go in September or maybe later this year.
Dana, what do you think the market does if the Fed delivers a cut in September?
Well, I think it'll be not much activity because that's what's priced in right now.
Right, 100%. No, I agree with that. But I mean, my question really stems from this. Lower yields in the U.S., what does that mean for equities, for the dollar? Is that a good thing or a bad thing in your opinion?
Well, I think for equities, all news is good news, especially when it's being driven by your Magnificent Seven and some of your superstar stocks. It's kind of what's going on apart from that. But certainly, I think it would deliver a lot of relief for companies that are very heavily dependent upon capital markets and low interest rates.
Sectors. Yeah,
like
and
real
also
estate, housing and construction. Yes.
No, I mean, I agree with you. And real estate property, I think, is the only sector within the S&P that is actually down on the year. So, there's definitely some scope for upside there. I guess, Dana, just last question here. I mean, if we do see equities rally in any environment, shouldn't we just be basically loading up the boat here? I mean, or is there any room to be a little bit defensive as, we are in the summer months and seasonally speaking, liquidity comes off?
Well, I think I'm not an expert in this, but I think diversity is important. Yes, you might want to put more of your money in equities because they just seem to rally no matter what's going on. But you also have to worry about certain risks. I mean, we're coming into the election season. We're also coming into the budget season where almost every year we have some kind of impasse. So I think that you need to be careful. You need to have some hedging out there, and that's what you need to do as an investor.
Dana Peterson, thank you so much. Greatly appreciated. Chief economist at the conference board today. It's like cross currents here in the market. I mean, yields recover a little bit. Explain quickly here, Damian. Why do you and I look at the inflation-adjusted yield?
Well, I mean, look, that's what you're actually making in real terms. I mean, I think Dana said was kind of important there, though. Just the fact that, look, equities in any environment, I mean, that is a bit crazy. And look, to be clear, she mentioned hedging. Vol, I mean, the VIX is back below 13, Tom. We look at this all the time. Nobody is trying to buy puts, is trying to hedge their gains. No one is trying to lock in here. That's a scary thought if the market turns.
I have to admit that's something that on not daily, but folks, every 3 days, I'm really looking at some of the charts Damian's looking at to look at the certitude that is out in the market. Futures, -2. It is certain he is outstanding even on a Friday. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Damian, and John. President Joe Biden vowed he would remain in the 2024 presidential race, but two gaffes in the span of 2 hours deepened concerns about his mental acuity that threatened his campaign. The president drew gasps and instant mockery online when he mistakenly introduced Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky as Russian President Vladimir Putin at an event in the late afternoon. Then, at the opening of the press conference, he fumbled a question about Vice President Kamala Harris.
I wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be vice president, but I think she was not qualified to be president.
We get reaction with Bloomberg's Kevin Whitelaw.
If this press conference had happened, I don't know, say a month ago, it probably would have gone, without a huge amount of attention. But in the wake of that debate performance and everybody trying to focus on every single moment, it's almost impossible for him to truly rewrite the narrative at this point, or at the very least is going to take, weeks and weeks and weeks.
Bloomberg's Kevin Whitelaw. The lead detective in the killing of cinematographer Helena Hutchins on a New Mexico movie set is planned to be on the stand at the involuntary manslaughter trial of Alec Baldwin. Alexandria Hancock of the Santa Fe County Sheriff's Office will face questioning today from prosecutors seeking to cast Baldwin as reckless. Defense lawyers are looking to portray him as just an actor doing his job. More than 1 million electrical customers in Houston are still without power after Hurricane Beryl made landfall Monday. With sweltering heat, most customers have been notified they won't have their power restored until the end of the weekend. This woman criticized utility companies.
A lot of businesses are suffering, but when you see the lights downtown with empty complexes, and then you see a mom and pop shop that's closed, that affects a lot of people.
Meanwhile, the current heat wave across the Southwest is especially brutal. In Las Vegas, the temperature has hit 115 degrees. That's not real feel. That's the real temperature for at least 6 consecutive days. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Damian, John.
Okay, guys, this is a David Rubenstein thing. Let's be honest. This is an Orioles studio. This is out on YouTube live chat. Separately, a crab cake sandwich at Superbook at Camden Yards is $38 for a crab cake. Granted, it's baseball, the land of the markup. But do you realize the food quality at Camden Yards? It gets within 30 baseball parks. It gets like rave reviews.
We for Bloomberg Business Sports, Michael Barr and I interviewed Jason Kelly about Cal Ripken. Yeah. And Cal Ripken has that huge Cal Ripken facility in Aberdeen, Maryland, which is and they have actually a replica of Camden Yards there. I believe the field, one of Fenway, one of Wrigley, but they don't serve the barbecue in the back of the right field like they do at Camden Yards. I know
I'm going to upset some people. Seriously. I don't go to Yankee games because the food's so bad.
Not because the team's so bad?
The Red Sox had the same. No, well, the team's so bad too. Bada bing, bada ba. But the fact is, food matters when you're spending that kind of money. Yeah. Whether if an $8 hot dog is one idea. I mean, do they only serve Domino's pizza at the Tiger Stadium?
Yeah. Well, you can get a good slice there. See, I've always said this. You want to take the family out to a great baseball outing. Yeah. Take them to a AAA game.
Yeah.
Because the food is reasonable. The baseball is fun. You can have a lot of fun out there. They're enjoy. I'm not trying to knock Major League, but hey, it costs money to go to Major League.
Thank you out on YouTube. $38 crab cake. That's the David Rubenstein.
Wonder what a LaBelle steak sandwich at Yankee Stadium goes for now out in left field. Those are delicious.
Are they really? I haven't.
That is the best steak sandwich you're gonna get. Best in the city.
Where do you like, out on YouTube, tell us, what's your best baseball food? It's a real mystery to us. We're only doing this for Bloomberg Business and Sports because I got to have something to talk about on a Friday. Flat, the VIX 12.60. Stay with us, Bloomberg Surveillance.
markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Some more inflation data, a little hotter than expected. June producer prices rising 0.2%. Market seems to be saying, the CPI mattered more yesterday. That tech-led sell-off leading to a 2% decline for the NASDAQ in yesterday's session. Money rotating into the small caps with the Russell 2000 ending the session yesterday up 3.5%. For the week, the Russell 2000 index has risen 4.9%. As we look at yields, the 2-year, even after the hotter than expected PPI print, is down close to 2 basis points, under 450, 449 right now. Bank earnings in the driver's seat to some extent for the morning. Wells Fargo sinking, warning it's not going to be able to whittle away costs as fast as expected. JPMorgan fluctuating, reporting record profit, missed on a few key metrics though, and Citigroup climbing. Equities trading, beating estimates there. Dow futures up 23, S&P E-mini futures up 1 point. The NASDAQ futures right now, they are down 7 points. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Damian, Tom.
Damian, John Tucker, thank you so much. Damian, we on the West Coast, they're up way too early. I mean, in Sausalito, fish restaurant in Sausalito, crab cake, $42. Everybody's raving about it. They say it's like a total. Would you spend $42 on a crab cake?
Well,
it looks gorgeous.
Well, I mean, when it costs $3.50 for a value meal in Malaysia, I mean, which is what one of our somebody just posted here on the YouTube channel. I mean, that's pretty unbelievable. But so
are you long Malaysia after their politics?
The ringgit's trading at its strongest level in 6 months.
I saw that.
Tom. I mean, they are not towing the line. They're basically going to hold fast, and the Fed's supposed to cut, and so interest rate gaps will narrow, and that's a good thing for the currency.
Right now, on the equity markets in America, thrilled to bring Cam Dawson, NewEdge Wealth. She'll be spending both Saturday and Sunday at Brooklyn Crab, having the crab cakes out in Brooklyn. Cam Dawson, yesterday was odd. Let's not go over the details. Small caps win. Mag 7 hammered. Was it nothing more than a constructive adjustment on the way higher?
Well, we do know that positioning got incredibly skewed, where hedge funds were very positioned into large caps in tech and growth and very underweight and short in small caps. So part of this is just a positioning snap and then a chase of that short covering. The question is, can it continue? And that really depends on the path of yields. It's good to remember that small caps rallied 20% in November and December last year because the 10-year yield fell 100 basis points. If yields can continue to fall, small caps likely can continue to rally, but maybe it only lasts a month or two because there's still profitability issues, balance sheet issues. Yeah. So a lot remains to be seen.
Cam, that's great, but the reality is a month or two is long-term for Damian Sassower.
Well, Cam, talk to me a little bit about, what we just kind of take away from this latest CPI print. I mean, are we really thinking the Fed's going to move here in September? And if it does, what's the dollar going to do off the back of that?
Well, now we got this PPI print this morning that came in hotter than expected. So now there's a big question mark about where PCE comes in, which is the Fed's preferred inflation metric. So we think that the odds of a September hike certainly went up after yesterday's data. But if we have a couple more data points that look like that PPI, maybe we do get pushed out to November. So this is still a very data dependent Fed, and we could see this kind of saw pattern within inflation data, which could keep us kind of in an uncertain place.
Well, Cam, what I'm really asking is September, December, it doesn't matter. When the Fed does eventually cut, what do you think the dollar will do? Will it finally start to depreciate relative to G10 and EM?
It certainly seems so, and we saw that in some of the price action yesterday. Of course, the dollar dropped a lot, and we saw a perking up of EM stocks. And it's still very much in a downtrend if we look at EM versus S&P 500, but there is some movement and action there. So if there is follow through and the Fed is cutting more and being more dovish than other central banks, then yeah, it could set up for a weaker dollar. The question is, though, if other central banks are having to cut further, then the dollar may still be the best game in town.
Cam, yesterday we had some diminished organic revenue growth, right? I mean, Dawson's house, it's just loaded loaded with Frito-Lay
Oh.
and Doritos. She's like the queen
She's
of
so
like,
healthy. I don't believe
triple
you.
spicy
No
jalapeno
way. No
Doritos.
way. No additives.
We had, Cam, yesterday some organic revenue growth shortfalls outside of the Mag 7. Does a pro like you extrapolate that revenue shortfall over to those 7 wonder stocks, or is it discrete and separate?
I think this is so important and maybe the most important trend or theme going into 2025
you got something right for
is
you.
that we're seeing pricing power fade. And it's really interesting because as long as CPI remains weak, this is effectively the market or the economy saying that companies cannot pass through price increases to their end consumer. Look at the chart of shipping costs and durable goods prices. In 2020 and 2021, they went right up together, meaning that as shipping costs went up, durable goods prices went up because it got passed through to the end customer. Now shipping costs are soaring, but durable goods prices aren't moving higher. This means that companies are having to absorb them in their margins, which means that there is very much risk to the margin forecast in 2025 EPS estimates.
Well, I'm so happy you brought up affordability, and we know that home affordability here in the U.S. is really, really poor right now. But I mean, if you just look at some of the other like autos, for example, I mean, or travel for that matter. I mean, Cam, talk to us about, just generally speaking, after you back out all of those fixed costs, all of the discretionary, what's left for the consumer? Do they have any spending power left?
We're certainly seeing or hearing anecdotes of them getting pinched. Look at Delta's earnings from earlier this week saying that they're seeing fading pricing power. I was at JFK yesterday, certainly seen no evidence of a waning in demand, but certainly there is signs that consumers are getting pinched. We continue to hear this wonderful word choicefulness out of the likes of people like Walmart.
Was that come on, stop. Was choicefulness in Graham, Dodd, and Cottle when you read it, Cam?
Certainly not. But again, this is a reflection of consumers hitting a wall as far as how much more price increases that they can take, which means that companies are taking it on the chin in margins.
Right. Cam, it's Friday. I got to quote Doug Cass in a moment. Help me here. What's your new adjustment off Yardeni's 5,800 on SPX? Can I get a 6,000 out of you this morning?
The one thing I'd note is that if we trade to 5,800 by the end of the year, and assuming that the market is right for their $277 a share for 2025 earnings estimates, you would be trading at a higher PE multiple on the year ahead forward than you were at the peak in 2021.
Cam,
so never say never, but that's pretty high.
Got to go. Cam Dawson, thank you so much. NewEdge Wealth. We'll talk to her at 5,800 as well. Okay, we got a problem. I mean, Doug Cass is like a piñata. He's been cautious. He's been short. It's been difficult. Even worse, the Yankees. He's wearing black this weekend. He's got a 125-pound lobster salad at Loaves and Fishes in the Red Horse Market in the Hamptons. And he says, Amagansett, you got to go to Bostwick.
Bostwick's, of course.
To get the price. Give me some color, Damian, on Bostwick. You and Cass have a real life.
Well, the shooters at Bostwick's are what you really want. The oyster shooter. So basically what it is, it's kind of like a clamato juice, and they put the oyster in it, so it's like a spicy kind of Bloody Mary with it's really good.
Okay, but if you're not a hitter like Cass, can you get in?
The way to get in there, it's difficult to get in because they don't take reservations. You got to wait in line. But the way you do it, Tom, is you go to the bar.
Yes.
And you slip the bartender a Finn or a 10
Oh, stop. You're giving him $100.
And he tells you that they have this special seating outside to the right of the window, and he basically got us in there. We didn't have to wait in line or anything. It was beautiful. We got the chowder, we got the lobster roll, we did the whole smash.
Did you have the Mongolian barbecue ribs?
I did not. I didn't know those were on the menu. What I will say, though, is in full disclosure, Bostwick's is a very affordable institution, and the food is fantastic.
It's a little bit down to earth. I mean, if you go south, you go across this road, it's not the same.
It's not the same. Yeah, no. I mean, look, going out east as you get further out to Montauk, and I think things cheapen up a bit. I mean, certainly 57 Main and Tuttlegiorno and Seg can be a bit pricey.
I got 30 seconds. Cass is hysterical about the Yankees. Should he be? Is it just a patch?
Oh, man, it's going to be tough, man. I mean, Aaron Boone is in trouble. I mean, our pitching coach just got ejected yesterday. I mean, I forget that umpire's name, Moscoso. I mean, he threw Aaron Boone out last year. So, the umps everybody's out to get the Yankees, man. They've got a big target on their back, and it's no good. It's not good. It's not good.
Damian Sassower, maybe he'll continue with us into the 9 o'clock hour. John Tucker, you're awful quiet over there today.
I'm just going through the latest economic data as well as bank earnings and trying to come up with some sort of thematic response to you.
No, we'll have to see.
Keep searching.
I mean, that's all there
I
is.
was eating my breakfast.
That's all there is to it. Coming up, Margaret Brennan will be with us as well. Face the Nation as well. It's summer. Mike Campbell's tour de force. Mr. Henley.
This is Bloomberg Surveillance with Tom Keene and Paul Sweeney.
Are these stocks under-owned by institutional Wall Street?
A lot of these companies talking about generative AI.
With Lisa Mateo on markets.
Investors just worried about the ongoing sales slump in China.
And Michael Barr with news.
A ship traveling through the southern Red Sea has been attacked.
The best in economics, finance, investment, and international relations. This is Bloomberg Surveillance on Bloomberg Radio.
Good morning, everyone. From our road headquarters in New York City, Bloomberg Surveillance, Damian Sassower in for Paul Sweeney. A busy 9 o'clock hour for you with a lift to the markets. Futures up 6. On bank earnings, our John Tucker.
All right, let's start off with those bank earnings. JPMorgan Chase's profits jumping sharply in the second quarter. A nation's biggest bank posting profit that's up 25% from a year earlier. Wells Fargo shares sinking, warning they won't be able to cut costs as fast as forecast. Citigroup climbing. Equity trading beat estimates there. And producer prices again climbing in June, slightly more than forecast. But Treasury yields, they're actually lower. The 2-year down 2 basis points. Dow futures up 79. S&P E-mini futures up 5. The Nasdaq futures after yesterday's sell-off 9 points higher. We check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Damian, Tom.
Bloomberg Surveillance brought to you by Interactive Brokers, their bond marketplace. Access their vast selection of over 1 million global fixed income securities. No markups, no built-in spreads, low transparent commissions. Learn more at ibkr.com/bonds. Rarely do I listen to every word of a press conference. I rely on Anne-Marie Horton. I rely on Josh Wingrove, who will join us in a moment. A blistering question late in the press conference yesterday. And I rely on Nancy Cordes of CBS, who was out front early in the press conference, maybe with a normal question, and then the follow-on question, which is about the uproar this nation is in. Joining us now from the CBS television network, Face the Nation's Margaret Brennan. Margaret, what will Nancy Cordes report today for you at CBS?
Not sure yet. I think she's already out there wrapping up what happened last night and this victory lap that some of the Biden supporters are out doing on all the networks and cablers this morning, trying to say, hey, look, the president can stand on his feet and answer questions for the better part of an hour at the end of a long, intense string of days of meetings with world leaders. But
Margaret, as Fox, of course, noted, no surprise there, 9 times he drifted off without closing a thought to anyways. Is your reporting, and as you discuss this on Face the Nation, on CBS and on Bloomberg Radio this weekend, is there a discussion here about a president that is the anyways president?
Well, look, it's not helpful, right? I mean, it doesn't... The fact that we are collectively holding our breath, watching a press conference, is not a good thing for a campaign, right? What the Democrats would argue is, well, Donald Trump's on a golf cart. He doesn't have to go do back-to-back meetings with world leaders. He doesn't have to actually govern. He doesn't have to do anything right now. And he's not put on the spot to answer questions like this. And by the way, he's 78 years old. They want the conversation to be about that. But exactly your point in terms of where the conversation is why Democrats like Jim Himes, the ranking member on the House Intelligence Committee, came out last night saying, you know, if Democrats actually want to run on policy, if they actually want to run on a vision for the country, the conversation has to shift, and it won't if the nominee is 81 years old. So I don't think this drumbeat is going to stop in the coming days.
Margaret, let me bring in my colleague, Damian Sassower.
Margaret, I believe you have 2 boys. I myself have 2 daughters. When I get very excited, I confuse their names all the time. You know, I call them one Emma, the other one Hayden. I mean, just how big was last night's faux pas? I mean, and more importantly, will the nation view it that way?
I constantly do that. I remember my parents did that, and you're like, God. No, I mean, those things I think are understandable. Those are human moments. Absolutely. What happened during the debate was not about inverting names. It was about not being able to complete a sentence and coherently articulate a positive vision for the future, right? And that is the thing. It's repairing and erasing that from the collective memory. We will have polling, and from our Anthony Salvanto this Sunday in terms of whether the numbers have actually shifted. And as you heard from the president last night, he said unless he's presented with numbers that say to him there's no path to victory, he's dug in.
And that's important. This is a character that's done this for convention after convention for CBS. Tell us about Face the Nation this weekend. Will you show up to lead it?
We will be talking about all of this in terms of a very dynamic situation.
Yes, I can't imagine.
Absolutely. And by the way, if Democratic leadership wanted this conversation to end, they wouldn't have created a permission structure for members to come out and say what they're saying, right?
Right.
So the leadership is not saying it themselves. They're unlikely to do so. They won't paint the president into a corner. And they won't embarrass him, but they're allowing for membership to do so. So we will talk about that. We will have Dean Phillips, who tried, by the way, to challenge Joe Biden and the Democratic Party with that primary bid and wanted these conversations to be had a year ago. We'll also have that polling. We'll also have Tom Cotton, the Republican senator from Arkansas, as we look at who is Donald Trump going to pick as a running mate. And that may shift part of this conversation next week.
A special 3-hour edition, Face the Nation. See it on the CBS television network Sunday morning. And of course, on Bloomberg Radio, 2 p.m. in New York, Washington, Bloomberg 106.1 Boston, Newburyport as well. Face the Nation, Sunday at 2 on Bloomberg Radio. As I said, folks, I watched every minute of the press conference, and trust me, I usually don't do that. And I kept waiting, and finally the president, reading off his card, went to Josh Wingrove. And there was a silence in the room, and the machine started. Damian, Josh Wingrove is a machine, and that he just asked clear, direct questions. And the place stopped. It was a tired Biden deep into the press conference, and there was Wingrove being a journalist, not being nice. He joins us now. Josh Wingrove, the energy in the room, Anne-Marie Horton off to the center and you off to the left. What was the room like when you asked those piercing questions late in the press conference?
I'm very comfortable in Anne-Marie's shadow, Tom. You know, I always have been. I always will be.
Aren't we all?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, the backdrop was this thing was dragging on, right? And he had that flub on calling President Zelensky President Putin that led to audible gasps in the room. And of course, they themselves have said he doesn't do as well on his feet late at night. So there was sort of a tension in the air about how this would all go. Democrats this morning saying they think it went pretty well, but it's kind of in that muddy middle. It was not so soaring that it would be so great as to beat back these concerns entirely, but it also wasn't a disaster that would make it clear that, you know, people close to the Biden administration would have to talk to him. So right now it is just a question of what is in Joe Biden's bubble.
In the old days, Josh, you're way too young for this. There was a basement of the Hay Adams Hotel, and maybe there's Capitol Grill or other places in Washington where all the machinery hangs out looking for the next job. Are the Biden troops at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue and in the West Wing, are they now out looking for the next job?
I have not seen that, but I did not make it to Off the Record in the basement of the Hay Adams last night. Maybe come back to me tomorrow, Tom, and we can talk a little bit more about that. They are not looking for the exit entirely, but there are people for sure among this administration, this campaign, who think, my gosh, this is maybe not going as we see it. Now, the question is, are they outer ring or are they inner ring? Joe Biden listens to a very short list of people, and right now all reporting is that it's not just him. Those people are dead set on him running, and he's not really opening the door to it. But let's not forget what he said last night. Remember, he used to talk about God Almighty would be the only reason he wouldn't run. That was just a week ago with George Stephanopoulos. Last night, it was like, well, if they bring me polling, as you alluded to earlier, with Margaret, that maybe I won't run again. He also talked about other scenarios. And so he's opening the door, or at least signaling the door could open if, you know, circumstances change. He was not doing that a week ago. So at the very least, that signals that he realizes the peril that he is in, or at least the deep concern among Democrats. But right now, we're just watching what will today look like. Remember, Pelosi, when she broadsided him, went on TV and said, zip it until the end of NATO. Well, NATO's over now, or the summit's over, I should say. NATO itself, still going strong. You know, now we will wait and see, is it just a handful of Democrats who say, Joe, time to go, or is it a flood? We're going to wait and see today.
Josh, I don't have much of a life either, so I was watching also. And my question for you is a simple one. I found myself watching, but I found myself waiting. And what I found myself waiting for is for him to address the elephant in the room explicitly, his age. Why hasn't President Biden explicitly addressed his age?
He sort of danced around it. I mean, half a dozen of the questions touched on it. You know, they've campaigned on it a little bit. He still thinks he's in good health. I think that is important to understanding this. Presidents and prime ministers never always make decisions that might seem, you know, the clear one to the rest of us, because they themselves might view things differently. And I think Biden's a little bit in that camp. He genuinely believes that he is the one to beat Donald Trump. Remember, for those of us who didn't watch the press conference, of course, we did ask him about the question of a test. You know, people have been saying, well, if you're so good, if you're so healthy, your last physical was in February, the neurological portion of that exam was in January.
Right.
Take another test. Gretchen Whitmer, the Michigan governor, a Democrat, has said it couldn't hurt. And he really kind of, I guess, opened the door to it. He said he would do it if his doctor had told him to, but really did not pledge to do it. So I don't think that's going to put a lot of concerns to rest.
I got to squeeze in one more question, Josh Wingrove. We got to get back to the markets. As we speak, Ron Klain is speaking to Joe and Mika. I'm not going to mince words about it. There's three people, the old guard. They've been miles down the road with Gore, Obama. I'll even bring in the Clintons and now President Biden. Is President Biden listening to someone like Ron Klain, iconic, or is he shut him out?
I think he's listening to Ron Klain, but the list beyond that is pretty short, Tom. Pretty short.
Okay.
We're talking a dozen or fewer people who could get through to the president.
Josh Wingrove, thank you so much for last night bringing the press conference to a complete stop. He is our White House correspondent. Just outstanding work for Bloomberg News last night. Damian, your thoughts on this moment for America?
You know, I'm just looking at Oxford Languages here for synonyms for the word gaffe, and they are not good. Botch, fluff, boop, blooper, slip up. I mean, mistake, error. It's terrible out there. Bloop,
And
boop.
what's interesting about this is the SNL moment of it, the Saturday Night Live moment of it. When I heard it yesterday, I'm laughing like everybody else. When I hear Michael Barr replay the tapes, it's much harder the morning after.
I agree.
No other questions. Should we do something in the markets now?
Yeah, sure. Let's do a market
Mag
check.
7, what do you think? It's outside your window.
Mag 7. I mean, look, it's, you know, for me, it's not about earnings. Everyone's saying at the equity move here, it's about earnings, it's about forward earnings. For me, it's about a flight to quality. I think the Mag 7, many people believe it's a quality investment, something, a place you can park your money and where it's going to be there at the end. I'm not so sure.
And quickly here, if you have a vector of disinflation and lower yields, that assists
the duration trade, correct?
The duration trade of their free cash flow, the calculation
the discounting.
of this that you and I forgot 15 years ago.
That's right. Those future cash flows aren't going to be worth nearly as much as they once were, but maybe they will if the Fed really does start to cut aggressively. But it's really about the long end. Is the long end going to cooperate? I'm not so sure here. I mean, if you ask Guy Jersey, he thinks 10s are going to be range bound here at current levels.
He's looking at England.
Look at the curvature.
Spain. He's looking at the
England,
soccer
Spain.
game this weekend.
That's right. He's looking at Yamal.
Jersey's checked out.
He's looking at Lamine, Yamal, Harry Kane, Jude Bellingham. He's looking at. I mean,
what do you think?
Look, I mean, a lot of people are rooting for England. I'm rooting for Spain, man. I love the way they play. They look like the better team, too. But, look, England hasn't won in so long. I think it's been since the 60s. So, you know, you got to kind of, your heart goes out to them.
I just learned this like 20 minutes ago. Pharaoh got the Gulfstream.
Oh, he's going.
He's going.
Get out of here.
He's going.
Can he pack me up?
No, he got the Gulfstream. And, you know, he's like, you know.
How's he do
that? I said, give it to John. He actually cares.
How does he do that? You know, he cares about F1 more now, too, because Verstappen's looking a little vulnerable here. I mean,
it's fun, isn't it?
It's getting fun again.
It's really fun. To see Sir Lewis fall apart at Silverstone. I mean, that was like real sport.
Oh, my God. I mean, that was really... Did you see when they were watching the soccer match, Hamilton and I forget who he was watching with from... I mean, it was awesome. It was awesome.
Great. Well, stay with us. We're going to continue through this hour and on through this Friday on Bloomberg Radio from New York City, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
Good, I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg News with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Let's start with the latest inflation data. Producer prices climbing in June by slightly more than forecast. Producer price index for final demand rising 0.2% from a month earlier. Kind of ho-hum reaction. In fact, the two-year yield is down close to 3 basis points. We're at 4.48. The 10-year unchanged. That's at 4.20 right now. And again, bank earnings in focus this morning. JPMorgan Chase reporting record profit. Equity traders there notching a 21% revenue jump. Fees from investment banking, that soared. Citigroup saying second quarter revenue was $5.1 billion. That's up from the $4.7 billion analysts expected. That's because of higher equities revenue. And Wells Fargo, a miss there. They're getting punished this morning. The expenses for the quarter climbing 2%. Dow futures up 66. S&P futures, they're up 4 points. The NASDAQ futures up 2 points. We check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Tom and Damian.
John Tucker, thanks so much. Damian Sassower and Tom Keene with an eclectic set of people coming up, ready to get back to the markets and equity. This is a joy and always an honor. Joining us, iconic at Goldman Sachs for years, is Robert Hormats. He has a book I'm going to mention here in a moment, but his work has been profound on America's relationships, particularly across the broader Middle East and to China, where he'll be traveling to soon. Ambassador Hormats joins us. I'm doing everything I can, Bob, not to say, what do you think about Biden? We don't have time to waste on that. I got to go back to your book. It is the best book on the domestic and fiscal responsibility of this nation as we project a foreign policy. The only one that can tie your shoelaces is Richard Haas, who reformulated the Council on Foreign Relations. With this debt and deficit, how do we prosecute a foreign policy?
It's going to be more and more difficult. I think you've put your finger on something. It's the elephant in the room that no one wants to talk about, and that is the inexorable increase in debt and deficits is going to mean that, first of all, future generations are going to inherit a huge debt and a huge interest burden, but also the competition for money within the U.S. government is going to intensify. And if you need more money for defense and national security, you're competing with a variety of other parts of the government who want money for their elements of their policy, like social issues. And we're going to have a social problem if we cut those programs, and we're going to have more and more security risks if we don't fund security. And our allies see this, and they see us as less reliable as an ally and less reliable fiscally.
Right. Bob, this is important. When you and Secretary Clinton, and whatever you are, folks, Republican or Democrat, Clinton and Hormats said it's about economics, it's about our relationships across the world. You're going to need someone encyclopedic on Asian derivatives, swap rates, and how they fold into the governments of Asia.
Yes.
So the new undersecretary for you is Undersecretary Damian Sassower.
Bob, but I really want to know, you were just in China, and we know that sentiment in China is weak. You know, just how weak is it? Unemployment, youth unemployment, the property sector. You know, what was your take, boots on the ground?
Well, boots on the ground, the average Chinese, I think, is suffering from a series of uncertainties that need to be cleared up. And they're having, as you know, this so-called Third Plenum. They have it every 5 years, and that sets policy for the next 5 years. The whole Central Committee of the Communist Party meets, Xi Jinping gives a big speech, and that essentially is the policy for the next 5 years. They have to improve consumer confidence. They have to deal with the very difficult real estate problem they have with huge amounts of debt, state and local debt, foreign investment, which they need in order to create jobs, is leaving the country at a fairly rapid rate.
That's right.
The private sector is feeling a lot of uncertainty, which is the most productive part of the economy, is feeling a lot of uncertainty because they're not quite sure what role the government wants to play. Does it play a more involved role in the economy, or does it give more latitude to the private sector? And private companies, American companies and foreign companies, want to know what the rules of the game are, not just today or tomorrow, but over the next several years, because some of them are, as I say, are leaving. Some would be interested in coming, but they want to make sure that the rules are such that they can survive and that they're not interfered with, and particularly in the technology area where China really wants to excel. But you need not just Chinese companies, which are quite good at doing research, but you need to collaborate to a degree with foreign companies, and we and they are both pulling apart on technology, not coming together.
Well, I agree with you on the level of uncertainty in China about foreign policy, about domestic policy. But here's my question for you. If there's one certainty in China, and you began this conversation by talking about debt levels and how high they've gotten, they're through the roof in China. So, isn't President Xi trying to do the right thing? And why aren't markets rewarding him for his efforts to try and bring down debt levels in China?
That is one of the interesting things that doesn't get very much publicity. He is not a big spender. I knew him when he was head of Zhejiang province, party secretary, and he took a very conservative view of spending. And what they're doing, and they used to, for a while, to get growth going, spend money like crazy for every kind of
big bang stimulus, the whole thing.
And, roads, bridges, etc. They're not doing that now. What they're doing now is keeping a relatively conservative budget, but spending it on a number of things which increase what he calls the dynamic productive forces of the economy, which is technology. So they're spending money, but they're much more focused. It's much more on technology, both for economic reasons and because advanced technologies like quantum and AI are good for the military too, and they want to build their military capabilities.
We have a 3-hour conversation now. I'd just like to talk to you about the new Modi and the future of India, but we can't do that. You're going to put me in the Hormats timeout chair, but I got to go here. It's a public service, and that's what we do at Bloomberg Surveillance. You've done it for multiple party people. You're maybe associated as a Democrat, but you've done a lot of Republican service as well. You've been around the block. I know you're 79 and holding, but you're not. You're the same year as the president. Your thoughts on your colleague Joe Biden in politics when you, at 81, see Joe Biden, how do you interpret that different from Damian Sassower and Tom Keene and all of our listeners and viewers?
Well, I'm pretty well staying away from the domestic politics at this stage in my career.
Tell us about the medical side, Bob. You're in great shape.
I'd make a broader point, which gets to just what you're saying, that age really is not the central issue. The issue for people, and I'm in my 80s, is how much energy you have and how you project yourself and how well your mind works and your body works. So I would say that all this emphasis on how old he is not really the issue. And people have to judge for themselves the other elements of age. But I don't really want to get into a domestic political debate on Biden. If I were a doctor, I would give you my prognosis, but I'm not. So
is Secretary Blinken running our foreign policy unit almost singularly?
I would say that Biden actually does know foreign policy quite well, and I thought gave a very good press conference yesterday at the NATO summit. There were some mistakes, but generally he had a pretty good command of the issues. On the second part of the point, I think he's very fortunate that he has Tony Blinken, who's a terrific Secretary of State, and Jake Sullivan. Jake and I shared offices when we worked for Hillary Clinton. He was her foreign policy advisor. I was her economic policy advisor. So we worked very closely together, and he's extremely good, and he's got a really good team. I met with the Joint Chiefs of Staff about 3 or 4 months ago to discuss the interaction between geostrategic issues and geoeconomic issues. And they're very aware of the fact that economics plays a key role in our geostrategic strategy, and you need strong economic alliances to undergird political and strategic alliances, and he gets, I'm sure he's getting that kind of advice from
Ambassador Hormats, thank you so much for joining us today. Robert Hormats is public service to the nation, Vice Chairman Kissinger Associates. Red and green on the screen here, small cap stocks 2 days in a row. I'm going to call it a big covenant. It's a Calvacina index. Russell 2000 up 1.2%. Please stay with us. We need to get the markets open. Damian's ready to trade from New York City, Bloomberg Surveillance.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. The opening bell report as we wait the first trade. Traders looking past the data. It shows the producer price index climbing slightly more than forecast. There are data in the PPI that feed into the Fed's preferred inflation measure. They actually weren't all that bad. The tech-heavy NASDAQ, after dropping 2% in yesterday's trading, right out of the gate, the NASDAQ Composite Index, the first trades indicate that is headed higher. S&P 500, that is up 7 points right now, up 0.1%. The Dow Jones Industrial Average, 74 points higher. That's up 0.2%. Again, the NASDAQ, 20 points higher, up 0.1%. And the smaller caps, the Russell 2000, after yesterday's huge pop, 19 points higher right now. That's up close to 1%. And we check the markets for you all day long, right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that is the opening bell report. Damian, Tom.
Thanks so much. Damian Sassower and Tom Keene here, getting you through into the weekend, into the rest of July, into the heart of earnings season. Of a lot of coverage on that. The summary for those joining JPMorgan, I guess great. Citigroup, sort of, kind of like great. Wells Fargo, not great, less than great. Did I do that okay?
Yeah, pretty good.
That was okay.
I think that was good. We thought it was CFA. That's CFA level.
We like to go back and talk about the analogs to other times. It would be better to talk to someone who's lived it and invented it and prosecuted the events of Wall Street over the decades. George Ball is chairman at Sanders and Morris. For me, he is iconic and definitive with the branding of a firm called E.F. Hutton years ago and with Prudential Beige. But it's much more than that. We're honored that Mr. Ball would join us today. George Ball, the moment that we're living in, the oddities of our technology companies, their profitability, their capital efficiency, does George Ball have an analog to another time of what we're living in the stock market now?
If you go back, Tom, into the last millennium, the last century, I think you can see the beginnings of the dot-com growth and then the bubble that broke, and go back even further in time when the consumer products companies were coming up with innovations in things like food that we take for granted every day. That Procter & Gamble was priced at 35 times earnings because it could grow at 20% for forever, and then it didn't. So there are analogs going back into the past, even back into the crash of 1929, when you had what were called investment trusts, the mutual funds of the day that were highly leveraged. People thought these were solid investment pillars for their retirement futures, and the leverage took them down. So if something appears to be too infinitely good forever to be true, it probably is not true.
This is really important, folks, and we're not going to turn this into a history lesson. George Ball is going to hang up the phone and walk away. But George Ball, you literally take this back to the lessons learned from Samuel Insull. It can be any number of scandals of the 20s and 30s, all ancient history out in Indiana, the blow-up of certitude of electric utilities. You pull it forward to the courage Arthur Levitt had in protecting the individual investor. Are we at a point right now where we need the same kind of religion to take away the shadows of Wall Street?
Wall Street, and I'm a Wall Streeter, is very good at obfuscating by disclosure. If you put something on page 187 of a disclosure document, it's not going to be read. Well, it's there, but how many people, including Arthur Levitt and me, and probably you, Tom, actually read page 187 of a prospectus? So I do worry that as we do more financial engineering, come up with products and investments that are structured, people really won't understand the detail or the guts of them. And that's very difficult. It's something that we need to fight against. It's good for Wall Street as well as good for investors if things are clear and simple.
George, you refer to the current beta regime here in the U.S. as a tired economic cycle. I mean, we are now in the summer months. It is hot, and seasonals, as you know, are quite negative. I mean, I'm talking illiquid conditions. Do you expect the shoe to drop this summer? I mean, what are you looking for here?
I do not expect the shoe to drop this summer, Damian. I would be very, very worried about, in fact, would expect the shoe to drop after Labor Day. We walk through the summer months. We go to the beach. Things are pretty good. Stock prices waft up. The world is optimistic, and that's happening right now. Were I a trader, I would bet on higher prices for right now. But then we get to the cold reality of it's fall, it's getting cold. We have to go back to school. People are more chilled in their expectations, and I think this is a tired economy with a high-priced market that is more apt to go down in the fourth quarter of 2024 and into 2025 than to go up. Cycles happen, and there's nothing bad about that. I think we've got a recession or a recessionette ahead of us, and that's not a catastrophe. It's just a likelihood, in my estimation.
George, I don't disagree with that in the least, but here's the question I do have for you. As you position for something to kind of break into Q3, I mean, do you sell in anticipation of that? Do you buy puts and try to hedge? I mean, do you try to make some income and write calls? I mean, what's the right approach as an investor heading into that environment?
Well, we all know that the right approach is steady as she goes. Have a portfolio allocation and pretty much stick with it. So I would probably sell stocks as they go up during the summertime to pull the equity weightings down to what I would call a comfortable norm or just below it. Market timing is for fools. If stocks start to go down fairly sharply later this year, you might actually sell puts to get income and to compile a portfolio. But retreat from the equity market, no. Pare back, yes, as you get into September.
Where does Wall Street fit into our future of passive index funds, of a public almost removed from the, not frenzy, but the effervescence that we had decades ago with the various firms you represented? What's the future of your retail Wall Street look like?
Wall Street is a very different path than the one that I grew up in, and that's probably good. Everything evolves. The retail investor now is much more into index funds, and they're broader, much less involved in the frenzy of individual stock trading, except, and this is key, Tom, the overwhelming volume in one-day term options and very short-term options is really driving the market today. And you can call that investment. It's not. It's pure speculation. It's gambling. And that's not constructive.
Right.
I don't think there's anything that can be done about it.
Well, George, this is important because Damian's kids are trading off the couch on this stuff. Damian, fold into here this new short-term trading frenzy to George Paul.
Well, that's right, George. I'm trying to square the circle here. Market timing doesn't work, but at the same time, you're talking about, cryptocurrencies deserving perhaps, a speculative or an investment place in your portfolio. You're talking about meme stocks. So how do you invest in those? How do you reconcile those investments?
I'm not in the business of reconciliation, Damian. I'm hopefully in the business of talking about it and investing.
Business of diversification.
I will separate cryptocurrencies from the others by saying that I think there's a very real risk of the debasement of the currency. And if that's the case, then the cryptocurrencies are probably a very good shelter. And there is a speculative appeal to them. On top
okay,
of
but
that.
George, I got 30 seconds, unfortunately. You hit a third rail here. Did Gensler make the right decisions on Bitcoin and Ethereum?
Ultimately, yes. He did it too slowly, did it in fragments, and did it in a non-comprehensive basis. So I think he can be faulted for stuttering toward the right place, but ultimately got into
Right.
more of a right place than a wrong on top.
George Ball, thank you so much. Greatly appreciate it. With Sanders Morris, but always with New York City, Wall Street there, and the former present chairman of the Securities Exchange Commission, Gary Gensler. Futures were flighty at the beginning. A deep 9 minutes into trading, the Dow's up 152 points. Even the NASDAQ has some green in the screen. I don't know what to make of it. You know, the VIX 12.38.
You know, I've got one of my EM clients coming to me asking me how to decompose total returns in, of all places, South Africa. Did you know that the Rand has been the best performer of all EM currencies year to date?
Mr. Winkler, Matthew Winkler, who actually brought me to Bloomberg, mentioned that to me in the famed food court the other day.
Let me tell you, Cape Town's beautiful this time of year. It's actually cooler, you know, because it's Southern
Yes.
Hemisphere. So it's
Oh,
not
thank
summer.
you.
It's not 90-degree heat here. I mean,
Are you
it's-
going to the Olympics?
No, I'd love to, though. I have a friend who's going. He's so excited. It's hard to get tickets to those events.
Yes,
you know
it is.
that. Really,
you got to
really
be
hard.
Katie Greifeld.
Oh, yeah.
She's got it. With our news in New York City, Michael Barr.
Thank you very much, Tom, Damian, John. President Joe Biden has promised continuing support for Ukraine and says he will stay in the presidential race. Bloomberg's Ed Baxter has the story.
All eyes on him as NATO closed and he held a news conference. There were gaffes. He mistakenly referred to Vice President Harris as Trump.
Look, I wouldn't have picked Vice President Trump to be vice president, but I think she was not qualified to be president.
And he substituted the name Putin when introducing President Zelensky.
Now I want to hand it over to the president of Ukraine, who has as much courage as he has determination. Ladies and gentlemen, President Putin.
But he did say he needed to finish the job now and that things had changed since 2020.
Situation I inherited in terms of the economy, our foreign policy, and domestic division.
Ed Baxter, Bloomberg Radio.
Meanwhile, as he closed out the NATO summit, President Biden touted the importance of the alliance. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg says he is not concerned about America's commitment to the alliance.
I expect that the United States will remain a strong NATO ally also in the future for at least three reasons. One is that this is in the U.S. security interest to have a strong NATO. In NATO, the United States has something Russia and China doesn't have, more than 30 friends and allies.
NATO's Jens Stoltenberg spoke to Bloomberg's Anne-Marie Hordern. U.S. scientists believe they have discovered a cause of the disease lupus that may lead to a cure. Researchers at Northwestern Medicine and Brigham and Women's Hospital say they have found a molecular defect that promotes systemic lupus. The disease affects over 1.5 million people in the U.S. with life-threatening damage to organs, including the brain, heart, and kidneys. And finally, it's another reason not to light up. New research from the American Cancer Society shows smoking is the cause of almost a third of cancer deaths. Global news 24 hours a day and whenever you want it with Bloomberg News Now. I'm Michael Barr. This is Bloomberg. Tom, Damian, John.
And Michael Barr, thanks so much. Talking about the Olympics, I think one of the insights of the week on the show, Michael Barr, help me here. Michael Nathanson, iconic.
Mm-hmm.
And I said to him, they brought in $1.2 billion advertising revenue at NBC in the Olympics. And I said, is anybody going to watch it? Michael Nathanson said, no.
Yeah.
He said, your household, Damian, with your kids, does anybody care anymore?
Breakdancing. Breakdancing is actually a sport in the
That's a
Olympics
sport
this year.
in the
Did you know that?
Olympics?
Michael Barr, you're not a purist? You're not a hip-hop purist?
I go back way to the Sugar Hill Gang era, way back in the late 70s.
Rapper's Delight. We're going to do that right now for you, Tom.
Have you guys ever thrown a discus?
That thing is heavy.
My knee went out so bad. I was limping for 3 weeks. It went like 6 feet.
Let me tell you, if Can Jam was an Olympic sport, I would definitely make it. I'm telling you, I can throw the disc.
How can we have respect?
discus.
How can we have respect for track and field? Seriously, if we're doing breakdancing coming out of the,
I agree with
break
that.
for
No,
July.
I agree with you. I mean, it definitely kind of demeans the substance.
What do you think,
of a lot of
Michael
those other
Barr? Does
sports.
anybody care about the Olympics?
Well, I think so. I think we're going to watch track and field and swimming and the big ones. Breakdancing, I don't know.
I could toss some javelin.
We're going to have team coverage. Gus is going to be there, the horse.
I drove one.
From New York City, Bloomberg Surveillance.
emerging.
Markets, headlines, and breaking news 24 hours a day on Bloomberg Radio, Bloomberg Television, and the Bloomberg Business app. This is a Bloomberg Business Flash.
And I'm John Tucker in the Bloomberg Newsroom with this Bloomberg Business Flash. Once again, small caps, the standout. The Russell 2000 is up right now, 1.2%, and that's after soaring 3.5% in yesterday's session. It is earnings season. Wells Fargo among the most active, down after their expenses were higher than expected. Wells Fargo right now, the worst performing stock in the S&P 500, down close to 6%. Citigroup shares, their lower equity trading, however, did beat estimates at the country's largest bank. And the interest rate sensitive sector, real estate, best performing in the S&P 500 among the major industry groups right now. Treasury yields lower even after the producer price index this morning showed a modest jump. The 2-year yield 2 basis points lower. We're at 4.48. The 10-year is at 4.20. And right now, the S&P 500, 16 points higher. That's up 0.3%. 5,600 even on the index. The Dow Jones Industrial Average is up 126 points. Again, the Russell 2000, 24 points higher. That's up 1.2%. And the NASDAQ 100, 57 points higher. That's a rise of 0.3%. And we check the markets for you all day long right here on Bloomberg Radio. I'm John Tucker, and that's your Bloomberg Business Flash. Damian, Tom.
Thanks so much. We're going to finish strong here on a Friday. We wanted to find somebody more miserable than any of our guests today, and that would be Victoria Bills joining us from Banyan Capital, Chicago. Victoria, you're a Chicago White Sox fan, so it's like worst in the world. How do you prepare for the rest of the baseball season, understanding that the White Sox, they're just struggling, to say the least?
Honestly, it's one of those things where it's a loyalty thing at the end of the day. The White Sox have had a history of being an amazing team, and like some of the stock picks that we're going to talk about today, I'm a deep value girl and someone who believes in the long value of teams. But definitely a Dodgers fan when it isn't White Sox season. So
okay, well, White Sox season is 31 games out right now. Which stock is 31 games out right now that provides real value for you in Banyan Capital?
So one of the stocks that I immediately think about is Vertiv Technologies, Vertiv Holdings. So this is a company that basically provides data centers, communication networks, and benefits overall from the headwinds that we've been seeing within the AI space. Right now, it is trading a little bit at a premium, but at about 31 times earnings, if I'm recalling this correctly. But it's one of those things where if we continue to think about the AI, so to speak, as some people call it, a bubble, or as I like to call it, just kind of the nature of technology as we know it right now, Vertiv seeks to benefit from these continued headwinds that they have, that are here.
Victoria, you are a deep value girl, yet I'm looking at some of the companies you recommend here. Apple shares, Novartis. Deep value, huh?
Yes. So Apple, for example, one of the key theses that I have around Apple is surrounding a lot of its IoT, so Internet of Things. Apple has, at least from the early 2000s, has been essentially collecting much of our human data, and based off of a lot of the information that they've been able to have, there is opportunity in terms of products and services that Apple is already starting to be innovative and implementive on, that is not only creating more generative forms of AI, but also because of the walled garden effect, basically helps provide a more protective barrier over how their UX and UI is created. This is, I think, very differentiating from some of the other AI services that we've been seeing, or even machine learning services that we've been seeing, because this is very human data. If you have an iPhone right now, it's tracking everything that you use.
No.
And so this is data that Apple is actively implementing and using to create better products for their company in the future.
Victoria, let's keep it simple here. You cover the firm's outsourced CIO clients, OCIO clients. You know, it's not just about stock selection, it's about asset allocation. Given where we are in the beta regime, given what your expectations are over the next 3 to 6 months, what asset classes should we be looking at specifically? What stands out to you?
Well, one of the other things, again, stocks and bonds continue to show a high correlation to each other. And so it is now more than ever, and I would say imperative, to find differentiation within the markets outside of those traditional stocks and bonds. And so this is where we actually at Varian are advocating for more active alternatives or even like active management plays. So whether that's through alternative ETFs, whether we're looking at BTAL, QIS, or even
BREIT.
Yeah.
Yeah.
BCRED. Well, not necessarily BREIT, but again, those, when we're looking at, again, like some of those like active alternatives, like this is what helps to differentiate from a traditional 60-40 portfolio.
This word, and I hate the word with a passion, conviction. How far out does Banyan Capital's intellectual study of equities go? Is your conviction out to August 1st? Do you have a conviction into year end? How far out do you believe in?
So it's an interesting question. I would say that the far out that we believe in is thinking about is as long-term as possible for a lot of these companies. So whether it's short-term shocks that happen in the market, those are the types of things that we have a tendency to ignore, because when it comes to the long-term value or kind of the long-term, I would say, progress within companies or within the stock market itself, there's always a trend towards upward growth and upward momentum. And so what we look at fundamentally is trying to find companies that, whether that's the underlying value within them or even, again, like their moat or niche surrounding the services that they offer, this is what I think is what unique offering.
And we mentioned Michael Porter like 2 hours ago. I'm sorry, this moat thing, fancy people like Victoria are talking about, but I'm sorry, Damian, moats around a given company, say Microsoft, is like a huge deal.
No, I hear you. I mean, look, what's really interesting though, and Victoria, my last question for you is this: you're having these conversations with, institutional clients, and they're is it 80-20? Is it 60-40? Is it stocks? Is it bonds? What are they confiding in you? How much information are they willing to share with you about their current positioning? Is that something that you have to struggle to get your arms around in today's day and age?
I would say a lot of the time with our institutional clients particularly, I think it's a little bit more of an easier and transparent conversation. Many of them are looking for cash flow and easy distribution. So real estate or even real estate are very, yes, exactly, are very easy conversations to have. But when we're talking about, for example, some younger clients that are looking to play into the alternative space, these are folks that are just looking to build out their wealth and are deeply concerned about some of the worries in inflation and worried about what's going on with the Biden administration. And so a lot of those conversations that we have with them is simply around helping them to understand where they can find value outside of traditional stocks and bonds, but also to not necessarily throw money at the wall and see what sticks. So be very calculating in that approach.
30 seconds here. What's your use of cash belief right now? What do you do with cash into Monday?
Cash on a Monday right now for me,
into Monday
over the weekend.
Monday.
No, not White Sox merch. What are you doing?
$40 lobster salad sandwiches.
So again, I would say what we would look into using cash going into the Monday or going into this, I would recommend highly, or I would look into S&P 500, at least the top 10 stocks that are within the indices. Again, this is driving a good chunk of the value at this current time. But it's a very simplistic, easy play without going into some of the more, I would say, grittier details or not really understanding the larger part of someone's financial situation.
Victoria, thank you so much. Victoria Bills, Banyan Capital, Chicago, this morning. I love talking about the golf thing today and the British Open. That was really valuable. I adore it, actually, to watch. The hardest part about golf is developing a consistent, respectable swing.
Yes.
How do you, as a mere mortal, you're only playing 30 hours a week. How do you do that?
For me, it's exercise. It's more of a mental game for me. It's not physical exercise. It's mental exercise. It's challenging yourself mentally to deal with the conditions when you're out on the course. Everyone can. I'll win every championship if it was played on the driving range, but on the course, the mental wear and tear that goes on, you really and drinking helps, Tom. I'm not going to lie to you. Drinking can help.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah, a little bit.
Speaking of drinking, we should say thank you to our control.
Drinking what?
Coffee.
Coffee.
Yeah, sure.
With what?
Bailey's.
What is this, an ad for Bailey's? Thanks to everybody on the team. Rich Truman, our producer. Ken Philly, our global technical director. Mike Campbell. Good morning, everyone. Have a great weekend.